Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The ship hummed with anticipation as it broke through the atmosphere of new dawn, the planet glowing beneath them like a second Earth. Dr. Elena Graves stared through the viewport, her fingers twitching against the controls as the blue and green surface of the planet spread below. It was breathtaking. After years of preparation, endless simulations, and calculations, they were finally here. She whispered a prayer under her breath, her mind racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. "Prepare for landing." Commander Lucas Kane's voice crackled through the comm, steady and calm. He was the kind of man who never lost his cool, no matter the situation. Elena took comfort in his presence, knowing he would keep the team focused. The colony ship Artemis descended smoothly onto the planet's surface, kicking up a plume of red dust. Elena felt a jolt of excitement as the landing gear settled into place with a soft thud. This was it, the first step on a new world. The ramp lowered, and she was one of the first to step out, her boots crunching against the alien soil. The air was breathable, as expected, and the sun, slightly larger and warmer than Earth, cast a golden light across the landscape. A faint breeze brushed her face, carrying a scent that reminded her of fresh pine. She inhaled deeply, marveling at how much new dawn resembled home. "Aurora Base," Kane said as he stepped beside her, "has a nice ring to it." Elena smiled. "It'll be more than just a name soon." They had arrived with the mission of establishing humanity's first permanent colony beyond Earth. The goal was clear: build the foundations of a thriving settlement, relay communications with Earth, and pave the way for future waves of colonists. Earth's overpopulation crisis had made expansion to other planets a necessity, and New Dawn was their greatest hope. Over the next few weeks, the crew worked tirelessly. Engineers like Iris Tanaka constructed the initial habitats, using prefabricated modules that snapped together like puzzle pieces. Elena oversaw the scientific installations, including the observation towers and atmospheric sensors. Kane handled the logistics, making sure everyone stayed on task while ensuring morale didn't waver in the face of the enormous challenges they faced. It all seemed to be going according to plan until they noticed the time anomaly. It started with something small. One evening after a long shift, Elena noticed that her wristwatch had gained an hour. She frowned, tapping at the screen, thinking it must have malfunctioned. The next day, the anomaly grew. Several team members complained that their watches were off by minutes, then hours. At first, no one thought much of it. It was easy to explain away the irregularities as the effects of exhaustion or glitches in their devices, but then the anomalies grew too large to ignore. "We were losing time," Kane said during one of their morning briefings. He placed a digital tablet on the table, displaying a graph that showed the growing discrepancy between Earth time and the colony's clock. The colonists looked at each other in confusion. Elena felt a shiver crawl down her spine. "This can't be right," Iris said, adjusting her glasses. "It's impossible for time to move differently here." Elena stared at the graph, her mind racing. As a physicist, she knew time dilation was a theoretical possibility under extreme conditions, such as near the event horizon of a black hole. But this was a planet almost identical to Earth. There shouldn't be anything here to cause such a significant distortion. But the data didn't lie. Their internal clocks were deviating by minutes at first, then by hours. Days on New Dawn passed in what felt like mere hours compared to Earth time. Kane stood, his posture tense. "We need answers, and fast. If this anomaly continues, we could be in serious trouble." Elena volunteered to lead the investigation. She pored over the data, analyzing every variable they had recorded since their arrival. She and her team worked day and night, but the deeper they dug, the more confused they became. There was no obvious explanation for why time was accelerating. Meanwhile, the colony continued to function, though an unease had settled over the team. Every day they waited for a response from Earth. Supply ships were supposed to arrive in a matter of months, bringing reinforcements and resources to help expand Aurora Base. But as time moved faster for the colonists, those supply ships seemed impossibly far away. The waiting stretched on. Communication with Earth became sporadic. Messages sent one day wouldn't receive responses for weeks, sometimes months. The crew grew restless. Anxiety festered like an open wound. One morning, Elena sat at her workstation, running yet another analysis of the temporal data. Her head throbbed from lack of sleep. She rubbed her eyes, trying to push through the exhaustion. There had to be something they were missing, some explanation for this madness. "I've got something," Iris said, bursting into the room. Her eyes were wide with excitement. Though dark circles marked her sleepless nights, she shoved a tablet into Elena's sack hand. "What is it?" Elena asked, blinking against the bright screen. "I was running simulations, trying to figure out where the anomaly is coming from," Iris said, "and I think I found a pattern. Every time the anomaly spikes there, it's just a burst of electromagnetic energy coming from the planet's core." Elena's heart skipped a beat. The core, that would mean that the entire planet is generating the time distortion. Iris finished, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's not random. It's a consistent rhythmic pulse, and it's getting stronger." Elena stared at the data, her mind racing. If the planet's core was causing the anomaly, then they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The time distortion wasn't just an anomaly, it was a feature of New Dawn itself. She felt a wave of dread wash over her. This planet, their new home, was literally out of sync with the rest of the universe. If the time distortion continued to increase, there was no telling what might happen. They could be stranded here, aging years while mere days passed on Earth. "We have to tell Kane," Elena said, her voice tight. "We need to figure out how to stop this." But even as she said the words, she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Commander Kane stood at the head of the room, his arms crossed over his broad chest as he listened to Elena's sub-report. His face was unreadable, but his eyes flickered with concern as she explained the latest finding. "So you're telling me the planet itself is responsible for this?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Elena replied. "The core is emitting periodic bursts of energy that are distorting the flow of time. The closer we get to the core, the stronger the distortion. If we can find a way to disrupt those bursts, we might be able to stabilize time." Kane was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the map of New Dawn displayed on the screen behind Elena. Finally, he spoke. "And if we can't," Elena swallowed hard, "then we were stuck. Time will continue to accelerate, and any hope of rescue from Earth will slip further and further out of reach." The room was silent. The weight of her words hung in the air like a leading cloud. Kane nodded slowly. "All right, we'll need to prepare an expedition. A team to investigate the core and find out if there's any way to stop them." Elena felt a surge of relief. Kane wasn't true one to shy away from a challenge. He was a man of action, and if anyone could lead them through this, it was him. "I'll lead the team," Kane said, turning to Iris. "You're coming with us. We'll need your expertise on the energy reading." Elena opened her mouth to volunteer, but Kane cut her off with a sharp glance. "No, Elena, you were staying here. We need someone to keep things running at the base while we were gone. And if something happens to us out there," he trailed off, but the implication was clear. Elena clenched her fists. She wanted to argue, to insist that she be part of the team, but she knew Kane was right. Someone had to stay behind. "Understood," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "But be careful." Kane gave her a small nod. "We'll do our best." As the expedition team prepared for their journey to the planet, core tensions within the colony continued to rise. Supplies were running low, and the realization that time was slipping away faster than they could comprehend began to weigh heavily on everyone's mind. Elena noticed the shift in the crew: sour behavior, short tempers, whispered arguments, a growing sense of fear that they were running out of time in more ways than one. And then there was Victor Hayat. Victor was a tall, imposing figure with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. He had always been outspoken, but lately his rhetoric had taken a dangerous turn. He had gathered a small group of colonists who were starting to question Kane's leadership, suggesting that perhaps the anomaly could be harnessed, not feared. "If we can control the time distortion," Victor said during one of their impromptu meetings, "we could reshape the future. Imagine being able to leap forward in time to advance human civilization by centuries. We wouldn't need Earth-style help. We'd be ahead of them." Elena had overheated one of his speeches, and it sent chills down her spine. She had seen this kind of thinking before: hubris, arrogance, the belief that humans could control forces beyond their understanding. It never ended well. But Victor was persuasive, and some of the colonists were beginning to listen. Elena watched from the shadows as Victor spoke to his followers, his voice smooth and confident. She clenched her fists, anger bubbling in her chest. This wasn't the time for power struggles. They needed to work together if they were going to survive. She had to find a way to stop Victor before he tore the colony apart. Alina watched Victor's scene group disperse, the colonists breaking off into small clusters, murmuring amongst themselves. She knew it was only a matter of time before Victor's sense ideas grew into something more dangerous. But for now, her focus had to remain on the expedition team heading to the core. Kane's group had already left hours ago, their communication signals faint but still operational as they made their way across New Dawn, rugged terrain, every moment without an update gnawed at her nerve. The base felt emptier without Kane's commanding presence. He was the one person who could hold everyone together, and now, with him gone, the tension among the colonists simmered just beneath the surface. Alina found herself pacing the narrow corridors of the colony's central hub, checking in on operations, trying to keep herself busy as she waited for news. She was in the middle of reviewing atmospheric data when the lights flickered. Her head snapped up. The hum of the colony's power system stuttered, then stabilized, but a low rumble seemed to vibrate through the floor. Alina's heart skipped a beat. She darted to the nearest console, fingers flying over the keys to access the power grid. What the hell, she muttered. The anomaly was fluctuating again, but this time, it was affecting more than just their clock. A surge of electromagnetic energy had rippled through the colony, throwing off their power systems. The readings were spiking. Suddenly, a sharp beat cut through the air. Alina glanced at the comm screen, a message from Kane's team. She rushed over, opening the communication link. Alina, we read. It's something big. Kane's sour voice crackled over the comment. His usual calm was gone, replaced by a sharp urgency. The distortion is getting worse. The closer we get to the core, we're seeing pockets of time acceleration, things aging, decaying in seconds. It's sort like walking through a nightmare. Alina's stomach clenched. Can you turn back? No, Kane said. We were too deep now. If we stop, the anomaly might spiral out of control. We have to see this through. Be careful, Kane, Alina said, her voice tight. The fluctuations are hitting us here at the base. If the core starts emitting that much energy, it could destabilize everything. There was a long pause before Kane responded. We know the risks. We're moving in. I'll update you once we reach the core. The comm went silent. Alina slumped back against the wall, her mind racing. The situation was spiraling faster than she had anticipated. She wanted to be out there with Kane, seeing it firsthand. But all she could do was wait. She wasn't used to feeling this helpless. Hours passed, each one dragging longer than the last. She kept her mind occupied with calculations, simulations, anything to distract herself from the gnawing anxiety. The colonists were restless, too, moving through the base like ghosts, the unease almost tangible in the air. Then, without warning, all hell broke loose. The alarms blared, red lights flashing through the corridor. Alina's pulse spiked, and she shot up from her seat, sprinting toward the central hub. She could already hear the chaos, unfolding, voices shouting, footsteps pounding, equipment clattering to the ground. When she reached the hub, she saw Victor standing at the center of it all, flanked by his followers. They were pulling equipment from the storage rooms, tools, generators, even weapons. Victor's eyes locked on Alina as she stormed into the room. What the hell are you doing? She demanded, her voice rising over the noise. Victor's smile was thin, cold. We were taking matters into our own hands, Alina. Kane, Sol's little expedition 1T save us time, Saj, running out, literally. Alina's eyes narrowed. You were going to make it worse. You can control the anomaly. You don't know that, Victor shot back. What if we were sitting on the key to humanity's future and you were too afraid to use it? Alina took a step closer, her fists clenched at her sides. You were playing with fire, Victor. This planet, it's not something you can control. If you disrupt the anomaly further, you could doom us all. Victor shrugged, or we could save ourselves. Were we done waiting for Kane and the others? We were done waiting for Earth. We were to take control of our own future. Alina's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she couldn't reason with Victor. He was too far gone, too drunk on his own ambition, but she couldn't let him go through with it. If he tampered with the anomaly, if he tried to harness the time distortion, it could tear the entire planet apart. You are not taking any equipment, she said, her voice firm. Stand down, Victor, now. Victor's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard edge. His followers shifted behind him, their hands tightening on the tools and weapons they had gathered. We're not asking for your permission, Alina, Victor said. Step aside. Elena's mind raced. She couldn't take them all on. There were too many of them, and they were armed. She had to think of something, and fast, before she could act. A deafening roar ripped through the air. The floor beneath them trembled, and the lights flickered wildly. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the walls around them seemed to warp, the space bending, stretching in unnatural ways. The anomaly was surging. Suddenly, the commons crackled to life again, and Kane's sass voice burst through, frantic and broken. Elena, the chorus. The signal cut out, replaced by static. Panic surged through her. Kane, come in. But there was nothing. Elena turned back to Victor, her heart racing. If you try to manipulate the anomaly now, you'll kill us all. The chorus destabilizing. Victor's face hardened, but for the first time she saw a flicker of doubt in his eye. He glanced at his followers, their earlier bravado now replaced with uncertainty. Victor, please, Elena said, her voice low but urgent. You want to survive? Then stop this madness and help me stabilize the base. We can still fix this. For a moment, Victor didn't move. His eyes darted between Elena and the equipment in his hands, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Then, with a frustrated growl, he tossed the equipment to the floor. Fine, but this isn't tie over. Elena did he waste time responding. She was already moving, issuing orders to the other colonists to secure the base and prepare for whatever was coming. The ground trembled again, harder this time, as if the planet itself was groaning under the pressure of the anomaly. Elena's mind raced with possibilities, calculations, theories, but none of it mattered if she couldn't stop the core from tearing itself apart. Suddenly, the commas crackled again. This time it wasn't Kane's voice, but Iris. Elena, it's bad. Iris said, her voice strained. The core energy spikes are off the chart. We're seeing massive fluctuations, time is accelerating in bursts. Kane's Sima's team, they were not going to make it. Elena's stomach dropped. What do you mean? We're losing them, Iris said, her voice breaking. The core is aging everything around it. They dying. Elena felt the ground sway beneath her feet. Her hands shook as she gripped the console in front of her. Kane's team, her friends, were being consumed by the very anomaly they had come to stop. But it wasn't over yet. It couldn't tree. Iris, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Is there any way to reverse it, to stop the core from accelerating the time distortion? There was a long pause. Then Iris' voice came through, soft but resolute. There's one way, but it's a long shot. Tell me. We have to overload the core, flood it with enough energy to short-circuit the anomaly and reset the time flow. But it'll take everything we got, and even then there's no guarantee it'll work. Elena's mind raced. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but it was the only option they had left. Do it, Elena said. Prep the overload. I'll handle things here. Iris didn't argue. The commas went silent, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the knowledge that Kane's team might already be lost. She took a deep breath, pushing down the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. There was no time for that. Now she had to focus. She had to save the colony. Elena moved quickly, issuing orders to the remaining colonists. Victor's group, shaken by the events, fell in line, their earlier defiance gone. Together, they worked to divert power from the colony systems, channeling it toward the core. The tremors grew more violent, the ground shaking beneath their feet as time itself seemed to warp around them. Elena's vision blurred her sense of reality, slipping as the anomaly twisted the space around them. But she kept moving, kept pushing forward. Finally, the moment came. The systems were ready. The overload was prepped. Elena stood at the console, her fingers hovering over the controls, one final command, and it would all be over. She closed her eyes, her mind flashing to Kane's face, his steady gaze, his unshakable resolve. She had to believe that this would work, that their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. With a deep breath, she pressed the button. The colony shuddered, the lights flickering wildly as the energy surged through the system. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance, suspended in time. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the core erupted. Elena was thrown to the ground as the explosion rocked the base. The noise was deafening, the world around her shaking violently. She felt the heat, the force of the blast. But then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. Silent. Slowly, Elena pulled herself to her feet, her head spinning. The base was still intact, but the anomaly, the time distortion, was gone. She stumbled toward the nearest console, her fingers trembling as she accessed the data. Time was stable. It was over. She sagged against the wall, her body heavy with exhaustion, grief, and relief. Kainsub's team was gone, but they had done it. They had saved the colony. As the sun rose over New Dawn, casting its golden light across the horizon, Alina stood alone, watching the dawn of a new future. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled across the barren surface of the planet as the exploration vessel, Argonaut, descended through the thick gray atmosphere. Captain Leah Moreau stood in the command center, watching the readings on her console as they neared the surface. Her fingers lightly tapped the armrest of her chair, the only outward sign of her tension. After months of searching, they had finally found it, an abandoned alien ruin hidden deep in the fringes of the galaxy. This is it, Leah murmured to herself. She turned to Dr. Ethan Rue, who sat at the console beside her. The scientist's eyes were wide with excitement, his fingers twitching over his datapad. Try, what do you think, Ethan? Dr. Rue barely looked up, his voice trembling with anticipation. It's incredible. The readings are off the charts. We've never encountered anything like this before. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Leah nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. They had found something remarkable. Yes, but the unknown always carried risk. Let's make sure we're prepared. We don't have a winter waiting for us down there. The ship landed smoothly on the planet surface, the thrusters kicking up a cloud of dust. Leah and her team of scientists, engineers, and security personnel donned their helmets, stepping out into the alien world. The sky above was a dull, stormy gray, casting long shadows over the massive structures that loomed around them. The ruins were unlike anything Leah had ever seen, tall metallic spires covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to hum with energy, even though they were clearly ancient. Set up the outpost, Leah ordered, her voice crisped through the helmet's cum. The team moved efficiently, erecting tents, unloading equipment, and establishing the necessary systems for power and communication. The air was tense but filled with anticipation. They all knew the significance of this find. This was a chance to unlock the secrets of an ancient civilization, one that had vanished without a trace. As they worked, Dr. Ava Serno, the team's xenobiologist, approached Leah. Captain, I've been running scans, and there are no signs of organic life, past or present, whatever lived here. They left a long time ago. Leah's brow furrowed. No life at all. Ava shook her head. None itself, but then it was wiped clean. All that's left are these machines. She glanced at the towering spires, a hint of unease creeping into her voice. We'll proceed with caution, Leah said, but keep an eye on those readings. If anything changes, I want to know immediately. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie red glow over the ruins, the team gathered in the main outpost. Dr. Ryu had spent the day studying the alien technology, carefully cataloging each discovery. I've never seen anything like this. The architecture, the materials, even the way the energy flows through these machines, it's all so far beyond our understanding. Leah listened intently, her arms crossed her. Have you figured out what these machines were used for? Dr. Rule hesitated. Not yet, but I believe this structure we ruin at some sort of control center. These machines, they weren't cheap just for communication or data storage. They were meant to do something far more powerful. A chill ran down Leah's spine of powerful. How? Yeah. I made a video play, but I'll find out. The hours dragged on, the team working late into the night. Leah made her rounds, checking on the progress of the research and ensuring the security personnel were alert. Sergeant Adrian Cortez, the head of security, was stationed near the entrance, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. You seem jumpy, Sergeant, Leah remarked as she approached him. Just doing my job, Captain, Cortez replied, his voice steady. This place, it gives me the creeps, feels like something so watching us. Leah glanced around at the shadowy ruins. Why, there's nothing out there. We've scanned for life there. Snot. Cortez gave a tight nod, but Leah could see the unease in his eye. I hope you be right, he muttered, more to himself than to her. As Leah walked back to the main tent, her cum crackled to life. Captain Morel, this is Marcus from Team 3. We've found something in one of the outer chambers. Leah paused. Kind of something. It's hard to describe. Looks like a machine, but it's massive, almost like it saw it. Stay where you are, Leah ordered. When she arrived at the chamber, Marcus and his team were standing in front of a massive, intricate machine that stretched from floor to ceiling, its surface covered in glowing alien symbols. The machine pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. "This thing is still active," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "They didn't touch anything, but it just woke up." Leah's pulse quickened. "Step back. We don't know what we were dealing with here." As the team retreated, Leah reached out to Dr. Wu over the comms CRV. "Thou found something. I need you to take a look." Wu arrived a few minutes later, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of the machine. "Incredible. This might be the core of their technology, if we can figure out how it works." Before he could finish, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the wall. Leah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. What the hell is that? The machine pulsing grew stronger, its light intensifying. Dr. Ryu took a step closer, studying it intently. "Found just reacting to us. This might be a form of defense system." Leah's heart pounded in her chest. "We need to shut it down now." Ryu scrambled to his equipment, trying to decipher the alien symbols that scrolled across the machine surface. But before he could make any progress, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the chamber. Leah spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. One of the researchers, a young woman named Tessis, was standing near the doorway. Her face pale. "Captain Marcus is gone." Leah's stomach lurched. "What do you mean gone?" Tessis pointed to the spot where Marcus had been standing just moments ago. There was nothing there, no sign of a struggle, no trace of him at all. He had simply vanished. Air spread out. Sarah Leah ordered, her voice tight. "Very, find him now." The team searched the chamber and the surrounding corridors, but Marcus was nowhere to be found. It was as if he'd been erased from existence. Leah's mind raced. Could the machine have done this? Was it responsible for Marcus's disappearance? And if so, what kind of power were they dealing with? As the hours passed and the search turned up nothing, Leah made the difficult decision to regroup. "We'll continue in the morning," she said, her voice heavy. "Boy, but I want double security tonight. No one leaves the outpost without backup." Back at the outpost, Leah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The machine's hum still echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the dangers they were facing. And now with Marcus gone, the stakes had risen even higher. As she sat alone in the dimly lit command tent, staring at the flickering data screens, she heard a faint voice over the comm. "Leah, it was Marcus." Leah froze at the sound of Marcus's voice. Her fingers hovered over the comm controls, hesitant to respond. "Dial Marcus," she said, cautiously. "Drea, where are you?" Static crackled through the speaker, followed by a distorted echo of Marcus' voice. "Harris, I am here. Leah, help me." Her blood ran cold. Something wasn't taut right. His voice sounded distant, warped as though it wasn't taut coming from him at all. She shot a glance at the control console, but there was no signal indicating his location. "Where exactly are you?" No answer, just static and then silent. Leah clenched her jaw. "Rio Cortez, meet me in the command tent immediately." She didn't really want to admit it, but she was beginning to feel the unease Cortez had spoken about earlier. This mission had started with such promise, but now the weight of the unknown was pressing down on her chest. Dr. Ryu and Sergeant Cortez arrived within minutes, both looking grim. "We picked up Marcus on the comm sale," Leah said, her voice tight like he called for help, "but we still can't locate him." Dr. Ryu rubbed the back of his neck. If the alien machines are involved, they could be distorting his signal. "We might be hearing something, but it doesn't mean he's such a liar." Leah didn't want to think about the implications of that, but the logical part of her brain couldn't deny it. "We're dealing with something beyond our understanding," she said quietly. "But we need to assume Marcus is alive until proven otherwise. He might be trapped somewhere." Cortez's hand rested instinctively on his sidearm. "Faro, what's out the plan, Captain?" "We head back to where Marcus disappeared. We'll start a systematic sweep of the area. No one goes alone. We stick together, and if you see or hear anything strange, you report it immediately." They armed themselves with advanced scanners and set off toward the chamber where Marcus had vanished. The air inside the alien ruins was thick, with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional hum of machinery. The shadows cast by the dim lighting seemed to twist and warp, playing tricks on their eyes. Leah's skin prickled with the sensation that they were being watched, but every time she looked over her shoulder, there was nothing there. As they moved deeper into the structure, the atmosphere grew colder, and the strange symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, as though reacting to their presence. Leah's fingers tightened on her weapon, her senses on high alert. "Keep your eyes open. I don't trust anything in here." They arrived at the chamber where Marcus had last been seen. The massive machine still pulsed with that strange rhythmic hum, casting an eerie light over the wall. Leah's eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Marcus. "Marcus," he called, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "Eric, you can hear me," respond. For a moment, there was nothing then. From the far corner of the room, a low guttural sound echoed back to them, a sound that didn't belong to any human. Cortez immediately raised his weapon, his eyes narrowing. "Trike, did you hear that?" Leah nodded, her pulse quickening. "Stay close. Whatever that was, it wasn't time, Marcus." The noise came again, louder this time, and Leah could feel the ground vibrating beneath her feet. The machine in the center of the room began to pulse faster, its light growing brighter. Dr. Ryu was staring at it, wide-eyed. "Something's happening. I think it's waking up." "Get back," Leah shouted. But before they could move, the machine let out a high-pitched whine, and the air around them seemed to ripple. The walls shimmered, and then without warning, something emerged from the shadows. It was a sentinel, towering over them, its metallic body gleaming in the light of the machine. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural blue light as it scanned the room. Leah barely had time to react before the sentinel lunged toward them, moving with surprising speed for something so large. "Fall back," Leah ordered, firing her weapon at the creature. The bullets ricocheted off its armor, doing little more than slowing it down. Cortez opened fire as well, but the sentinel seemed unfazed, its eyes locked on the group. Dr. Ryu was frantically trying to work the controls on his scanner, his face pale. "It's feeding off the energy in this room. The more the machine pulses, the stronger it gets." Leah gritted her teeth. "How do we stop it?" "I don't know," stammered QII. "I'm trying to figure it out." The sentinel lunged again, this time targeting Cortez. The sergeant dove out of the way just in time, but the creature was relentless. It swung one of its massive arms, smashing into the wall and sending debris flying across the room. "We need to shut that machine down," Leah shouted over the noise, pointing to the pulsing core in the center of the room. "It's the source of all this, Derek." Dr. Ryu nodded, scrambling toward the machine. "I'll try to deactivate it, but I'll need time." "Go," Leah barked. "Cortez and I will keep it busy." The sentinel moved again, this time faster than before. Leah barely had time to dodge as it swung at her, its arm slicing through the air like a blade. She fired her weapon at its head, hoping to blind it, but the creature was too fast. It closed the distance between them in seconds, its glowing eyes locked on her. Cortez rushed in, slamming his shoulder into the sentinel's side. The impact caused it to stumble, but only for a moment. The creature turned on Cortez, grabbing him with one of its mechanical arms and lifting him off the ground. "Adrian?" Leah screamed, rushing forward. She fired at the creature's stem, aiming for the joints, hoping to weaken it. The sentinel's grip loosened just enough for Cortez to break free, but the creature showed no signs of slowing down. Behind them, Dr. Ryu was frantically working the controls on the machine, his hands flying over the alien symbols. "I am almost there," he shouted. "Tara, just a few more seconds." Leah dodged another attack from the sentinel, her heart racing. She could feel the sweat trickling down her neck, her muscles burning from the effort of staying ahead of the creature's relentless pursuit. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Dr. Ryu pressed a final command into the machine, and the room was suddenly plunged into silence. The pulsing light from the machine dimmed and the sentinel froze in place, its glowing eyes flickering. "It's shutting down," Wu cried, his voice filled with relief. Leah didn't waste a second. She raised her weapon and fired at the sentinel's head, this time hitting a vulnerable spot. The creature's eyes went dark and its body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the team, the adrenaline still pumping through their veins. Leah slowly lowered her weapon, her body trembling from the intensity of the encounter. His voice hoarse. Leah glanced at the machine, then back at the fallen sentinel. "For now," she said, her voice quiet but I don't think we've seen the last of these things. Dr. Rui approached the machine, his brow furrowed in thought. Here, there's something you need to see, he said, pointing to the console. Leah and Cortez followed him, their eyes narrowing as they looked at the alien symbols displayed on the screen. It's Seng Containment Protocol. Leah explained, Doreen, this machine wasn't just a power source. It was holding something dangerous. Leah's heart sank. What kind of something? Rail hesitated. It's hard to say for sure, but from what I've been able to translate, this facility was designed to contain a powerful energy source. The alien civilization couldn't control it, so they built these machines to keep it sealed, but we disrupted the containment. Leah felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying we've released it? Not entirely. If we don't, we find a way to restore it. Whatever session there could get out. Cortez let out a low curse. Great. So now we were sitting on top of some alien doomsday device. Leah's mind raced as the implications sank in. They hadn't just stumbled upon an abandoned ruin. They had awakened something far worse. And now, with the containment field failing, they were running out of time. How do we fix it? Well, glanced at the console made him there. Terrace a control center deeper in the facility. If we can reach it, we might be able to reactivate the containment, but it's a long shot. Leah straightened, her resolve hardening. However, then, we don't have a choice. We'll go to the control center and shut this thing down before it's too late. The team gathered their equipment and prepared for the journey ahead. Leah knew they were venturing into the unknown, facing dangers they couldn't fully comprehend. But they had no other option. If they didn't stop whatever was hidden in the ruins, it could mean the end of them all. As they moved deeper into the alien structure, the walls around them began to pulse with energy, and Leah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something ancient, something angry. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the air grew colder. The alien machines were waking up, one by one, their sentinels stirring from their long slumber. But Leah wasn't about to back down. She would face whatever was waiting for them in the depths of the ruins, and she would stop it, no matter the cost. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The frozen winds howled endlessly across the desolate landscape, slamming against the reinforced biodomes that housed the mining colony. Inside, the rhythmic hum of the geothermal power system was the only thing standing between the colonists and the bitter cold outside. Elena Moreau stood by the control console, her brow furrowed as she studied the power output. Something was wrong again. Kaiba, I need you in the main control room, Elena said, her voice steady despite the rising frustration. Derate the power as fluctuating again. A few moments later, Connie Wu arrived, bundled in her heavy engineer song coat, her cheeks red from the brief exposure to the cold. She moved quickly to the console, tapping at the control. These fluctuations have been getting worse. Calvi muttered, more to Elena. Could be another fault in the geothermal regulator. I'll check it out. Elena nodded, her thoughts momentarily drifting to the challenges they'd faced establishing the colony on this ice-covered planet. The promise of untapped mineral wealth had been too great for Earth's as governments to resist. But living in such a hostile environment was proving to be more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Endless ice storms, extreme cold, and now these unexplained power fluctuations. Before Ki could leave to check the geothermal systems, the door to the control room slid open again. Dr. Marcus Green strode in, his excitement palpable despite the grim surrounding. Captain, you need to see this, he said, breathless. Anyway, the team found something during their last excavation. I believe it's a life form frozen beneath the surface. Elena's gaze snapped to green life here on this godforsaken planet. You can be serious, Elena said, folding her arms. This planet has been scoured by ice for millennia. There is no way anything could survive here. Green's eyes gleamed. That's is different. The structure is ours. Almost crystalline, and it's just emitting a faint bioenergy signal. I need to study it further. This could be the discovery of a lifetime. Elena glanced at Kai, whose expression mirrored her own doubt. But the colony needed results. If Green's discovery held any merit, it could secure more funding and resources for the struggling outpost. Elena said, but be careful. I don't want to take any chances with something we don't understand. Green grinned, already half out the door. Trey, you wonder, regret that. Later that evening, Green stood in the excavation chamber, deep beneath the colony. The crystalline structure was massive, its jagged surface gleaming faintly under the artificial light. Encased within it was something large, something alive, or at least it had been alive at some point. Now it was trapped in the ice, its form distorted by millennia of freezing. Green adjusted his visor, scanning the entity. The bioenergy readings were faint but unmistakable. This thing, whatever it was, still held some trace of life. He activated the melting device, directing it at the ice around the creature. Slowly, the ice began to thaw, revealing more of the alien size form. It was humanoid in shape, though larger than any human, with elongated limbs and a skull-like face that sent a shiver down Green's spine. As the ice continued to melt, a sudden pulse of energy radiated from the creature, causing the lights in the chamber to flicker. Green stepped back, his heart pounding. The pulse was brief, but it was enough to confirm what he suspected. The creature was waking up. The next morning, Lola, awakened by the sound of alarms blaring. Through the colony, she jumped out of bed, grabbing her comms device. What the hell is going on? Karia's voice crackled through the speaker. The power grid failing. Something's disrupting the geothermal systems. I am at the control room now, but we need to act fast or we'll lose heat and power completely. Alina cursed under her breath as she pulled on her coat and raced out of her quarters. As she reached the control room, she found Kara frantically working to stabilize the power flow, her fingers flying across the console. What happened? It's like something hit the grid with an energy surge, Eklitina said, her voice tense. I say, but the source ... is sun coming from below, deep below. Alina's stomach sank. Green. The two women exchanged a glance, both understanding the implications. Alina tapped her comm. Green, report, she ordered. There was no answer. Damn it, Alina muttered. Kaya, stay here and do what you can to keep the power stable. I am going down there. Grabbing a thermal pack and her sidearm, Alina hurried to the excavation site. As she descended into the ice tunnels, the temperature dropped sharply, her breath misting in the air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of ice shifting around her. When she reached the excavation chamber, the sight before her stopped her cold. The crystalline structure was gone in its place, stood the alien tall, grotesque, its icy prison shattered. Its eyes black and void, like glowed with a dim inner light. Green lay on the ground nearby, unconscious but alive. Alina Sagan went to her sidearm as she slowly approached the creature. It didn't move instead. It watched her, its head tilting slightly as if studying her. She tapped her comms. Tirai found Green ... at SOA. Get out of there, Callie says, voice came through. Sorry, the bioenergy readings are off the charts. That thing is dangerous. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She holstered her weapon and grabbed Green by the arm, dragging him toward the exit. But as she did, the alien raised one of its elongated arms, releasing a pulse of energy that sent a shockwave through the chamber. Elena stumbled, barely managing to keep her balance as the walls trembled. Ice cracked and fell around them, and for a moment, she thought the entire tunnel system would collapse. But then just as suddenly as it had started, the pulse stopped. Alina glanced over her shoulder. The alien hadn't moved from its spot, but the air around it shimmered with residual energy. It was as though the creature had merely flexed its power, giving her a warning. We need to get back to the colony, Alina muttered, pulling Green up and moving faster now. Back in the colony's medical bay, Dr. Green stirred as Alina and Kai stood over him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. What the hell happened down there? Alina asked, her voice hard. That thing nearly brought the whole colony down with it. Green opened his eyes, his gaze distant. It's sent. Alive, Derek, he whispered. Dear, more than that. It's elsewhere. Yeah, well, it nearly killed us all, Alina snapped. What were you thinking? Messing with something we don't. Green struggled to sit up, his body weak from the shock of the bioenergy pulse. You don't understand. This creature at sight, ancient, older than anything we've ever encountered. It was trapped in the ice, yes, but not by chance. It was imprisoned. Alina's frown deepened. Green shook his head. I don't know, but we've unleashed something we can control. It's not just a life form, it's something far more powerful. And now it's waking up. As if to punctuate his words, the lights in the medical bay flickered again. Elena clenched her fists. Whatever they had uncovered, it wasn't just a discovery, it was a threat. Days passed, and the situation in the colony grew more dire. The bioenergy surges from the alien became more frequent, disrupting the power systems and causing strange phenomena throughout the colony. Some colonists reported hearing voices in their sleep, whispers that seemed to come from the depths of the planet. Others experienced vivid hallucinations, seeing shadows that weren't there or feeling as though they were being watched. Kai worked tirelessly to keep the geothermal system stable, but the alien cell's energy was interfering with everything. Even communication with Earth had become unreliable. "We can survive like this," Alina said one evening as she met with her senior staff in the colony, command center. "That thing is going to tear this place apart, whether it means to or not." Sanders, the colony's security officer, crossed his arms. "Pray we should have neutralized it the moment it woke up. Now it's too late." Dr. Green, who had recovered enough to attend the meeting, shook his head. "Killing it won't resolve anything. Its bioenergy is too powerful. It's tied to the planet itself. If we destroy it, we could trigger something catastrophic." Alina sat back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The weight of command pressed heavily on her. Every decision she made now could mean the difference between life and death for everyone in the colony. "We need to find a way to contain it," Alina said. "Finally. If we can destroy it, we need to stop it from destroying us." As they worked through the night, Kite came up with a radical plan. The alien's bioenergy, she theorized, was not just a threat, it was also a potential source of power. If they could harness it, redirecting the energy into the geothermal systems, they might be able to stabilize the colony, send infrastructure, and prevent further surges. "It's silent risky," Caddy admitted. "If anything goes wrong, the energy could overload the systems and wipe us all out. But it's the best option we've got." Alina considered the plan. It was a long shot, but in their current situation, long shots were all I had. "Let's do it." Immediately. Stabilizers deep in the tunnels below the tunnel. The goal was to channel the alien's energy into the geothermal systems, using it to fuel the colony rather than destroy it. As they worked, the alien's presence grew stronger. The air around the excavation site seemed to hum with bioenergy, and Alina could feel the weight of its gaze on her as she and Kale worked side by side to set up the conduit. "This thing, it's not just waking up," Arkie said quietly as she connected a power cable to the main conduit. "Arkie's been watching us. It knows what we were doing." Alina nodded grimly. She could feel it too. As they continued their work deep in the ice tunnels, the atmosphere grew heavier, like the weight of the planet itself was pressing down on them. The alien presence loomed, silent but palpable, making each breath feel like it had to be fought for. Alina could sense it, and Kalia's hands trembled slightly as she connected another cable to the conduit. They were running out of time. The longer the alien remained awake, the more unpredictable it became. Dr. Green was in the control room, monitoring the bioenergy output. His voice crackled over Alina's commands. "You need to move faster. The energy levels are spiking. We're approaching a critical threshold." "Almost done," Alina muttered, glancing at Kameda for her. "How much longer?" Kale wiped sweat from her brow, though the cold should have made that impossible. "Sarah, a few more minutes. If we don't hit any more snag." Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled, ice shifted, and a low, guttural sound reverberated through the tunnel. It wasn't just the groan of the planet. This was something else, something alive. The alien's energy pulsed again, and the lights in the tunnel flickered wildly. Alina's heart pounded as she instinctively reached for her sidearm. "Sorry, Quanti, we need to move." Kay worked faster, her fingers flying over the controls as she activated the last of the stabilizers. The conduits hummed to life, glowing faintly as they began to draw in the alien's energy. The plan was working, but the energy surge was too intense, more than they had anticipated. The rumble in the ground grew stronger, and suddenly a massive crack split the ice wall near the alien's resting place. The creature, now fully visible, stirred. Its long, elongated limbs twitched, and its black eyes glowed brighter, locking onto Alina and Kala. It moved with an eerie fluidity, its body shifting and reforming like liquid in the low light. "We were not going to make it," Kaya shouted as she backed away from the console. The alien extended one of its arms toward them, and Alina felt a rush of heat and pressure, like standing too close to an explosion. She stumbled back, dragging Kaoli with her as the conduit sparked and sputtered. The alien was fighting back, resisting the attempt to harness its energy. Dr. Green's sass voice came through the comms, urgent and strained. The system is overloading. The energy levels are rising too fast. You have to shut it down. No, Alina barked back. If we stop now, we lose everything. Kyle looked at her, eyes wide with fear. I'll lose the whole colony if this blows. Alina, Alina hesitated, her mind racing. They were out of options. She glanced at the alien, its dark, bottomless eyes watching them with a predatory intelligence. It wasn't she just trying to break free. It was learning, adapting to their technology, using it against them. Before Alina could make a decision, the alien let out a low, unearthly sound, a deep vibration that rattled through the walls of the tunnel. It was no longer passive. It was angry. Shut it down, Kaya yelled, running for the emergency power switch. Alina grabbed Kaya's arm, stopping her tirade. Wait, TL, she shouted over the din tai. Look at the output. The energy is stabilizing. Kay blinked in confusion, glancing at the console. She was right. Despite the chaos the conduits were holding, drawing in the alien's energy and redirecting it into the geothermal system. The colony's power grid was balancing out, and the lights in the tunnels stopped flickering. We were doing it, Alina said, her voice tight with disbelief. Sorry, marking. But just as the words left her mouth, the alien surged forward, faster than she could have anticipated. Its long, sinewy arm lashed out, striking the control console. Sparks flew as the conduit exploded in a shower of light and debris. Kylie screamed as the shockwave threw them both against the tunnel wall. Alina hit the ice hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, all she could hear was a high-pitched ringing in her ear. She blinked, struggling to clear her head as the alien loomed over them, its form shifting and warping in the flickering light. Kai was on the ground beside her, barely conscious. Alina reached out, shaking her. Kai, get up. The alien drew closer, his black eyes narrowing, and for the first time, Alina felt true fear. This was no longer a battle for survival. It was a confrontation with something far beyond human understanding. The alien wasn't just a creature. It was a force and intelligence that had been dormant for millennia and was now awake, aware, and furious. Dr. Green's voice broke through the static on the comms. Alina, you need to get out of there, now. Alina gritted her teeth, pulling herself to her feet. Art out without Kaudai? She muttered, hoisting the unconscious engineer over her shoulder. She could feel the alien's gaze on her, a cold, heavy presence that seemed to pierce through her very soul. With a last burst of strength, Alina ran. The tunnel shook as the alien let out another pulse of energy, but she kept moving, each step a fight against the overwhelming pressure of the creature's power. Ice cracked and fell around her, and the walls trembled as if they were ready to collapse. She burst through the tunnel entrance and into the open air of the colony, slower levels, gasping for breath. Behind her, the tunnel caved in with a deafening crash, sealing the alien inside for now. Alina collapsed against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. She gently lowered Kampai to the ground, checking her vitals, still breathing, still alive. Dr. Green's voice came through again, louder now. Alina, what happened? Did you contain it? Alina took a shaky breath, wiping the sweat from her brow. We didn't contain it. Stronger than we thought. But the conduits, they were holding for now. There was silence on the other end, and Alina could picture Green's, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. We need to evacuate, Alina said. Finally, only one tea last much longer. Can't you just leave? Green protested. This is the discovery of a lifetime. Alina clenched her fist. Green was silent for a moment before responding, his voice quieter. Now, there might be another way, a way to contain it without destroying the colony. Alina's heart sank. She knew what he was going to suggest. You were talking about using the alien's energy as a power source, aren't you? It's already integrated into the geothermal system. If we can stabilize the energy flow, we can harness it, control it. It seems risky, but it's our only chance. Alina stood up, her body sore and aching from the ordeal. She glanced at the collapsed tunnel, then at Kai, who was still unconscious at her feet. The alien was still down there, buried, but not defeated. They had bought themselves a little time, but that was all. All right, Elena said after a long pause. Let's do it. She would give Green one last chance to fix this, but deep down, Elena knew the truth. The alien wasn't just a life form they could study or control. It was a force of nature, and they had unleashed it. Now they had to find a way to survive it. Hours later, Elena stood in the colony, command center, her hands gripping the edge of the control console as she watched the bioenergy readings on the screen. Green was in the geothermal plant, directing the flow of energy through the colony's side-quad power system. The conduits were still holding, but barely. The aliens' energy was overwhelming, constantly pushing against their fragile containment system. Wait, how much longer? Elena asked, her voice tight with tension. Green's voice came through the comms, strained and distant. We're almost there. I just need to make a few more adjustments. Elena glanced at the readouts. The power levels were rising again, dangerously close to overload. If Green couldn't stabilize the flow, soon the whole system would blow, taking the colony and everyone in it with it. Green, we're running out of time, she warned. I know, Green snapped. Just give me a minute. Elena's heart raced as she watched the numbers climb higher. She could feel the pressure building in the air, a low hum that vibrated through the walls of the command center. The alien Sarah's presence was growing stronger, more aggressive. It was fighting them, pushing back against their attempts to contain it. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the ground beneath her feet rumbled. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the command center's monitors flashed red. An alarm blared, and the screen displayed a single word: overload. Green, she shouted into the comms, eerie re-overloading. Shut it down. There was no response. Elena's stomach twisted with fear. She slammed her hand against the comms panel. Green, do you hear me? Still nothing. She glanced at Kaidi, who had regained consciousness and was monitoring the systems from a nearby terminal. Kaya, can you shut it down from here? Kaida's fingers flew over the controls, her expression grim. Kaya, I am trying, but the energy flow said too unstable. We were losing control. Dave? Elena cursed under her breath. She had trusted Green to handle this, and now they were all going to pay the price. Without warning, a deafening roar echoed through the colony, shaking the walls and rattling the console. Elena's eyes widened as the floor beneath her cracked, jagged fissures, spreading outward like spiderweb. The alien Seth's energy had reached critical mass. Get out, Elena shouted, grabbing Kali's arm and pulling her toward the exit. They ran, the ground trembling beneath their feet as the alien's bioenergy tore through the colony's infrastructure. Elena could feel the heat of the surge behind her, the air thick with static and tension. It was like running through the heart of a storm, the very fabric of reality warping around them. They burst out of the command center and into the open, the sky above them, dark and swirling with energy. The alien was awake now, fully aware, and it was no longer content to stay buried in the ice. Its power surged through the planet, shaking the ground, splitting the ice, and sending jagged shards into the air. Elena glanced back at the colony, the biodomes cracking and collapsing one by one. There was no saving it. Now the alien had won. But as she looked out across the horizon, she saw something that made her heart stop. The ice was breaking everywhere. The alien's energy wasn't just confined to the colony. It was spreading, reaching out across the entire planet. In the distance, Elena saw the ground rise and fall as if the planet itself was breathing. The alien's bioenergy had awakened something far more powerful than any of them had realized. And now, there was no stopping it. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The cold, sterile hum of the horizon set. Engines filled the cabin as Commander Sarah Briggs floated through the ship's narrow corridor. She brushed past the blinking control panels and glanced at the crew all strapped into their seats, preparing for landing. They were headed for Alpha Vectress, a binary star system unlike any humanity had ever discovered. 2 planets orbited each other closely: Zethra, a harsh desert world, and Nivos, a frozen wasteland. The planets couldn't have been more different, but scientists on Earth had detected something strange. The planets seemed to share a mysterious connection, something deep and unseen that defied understanding. The crew's mission was to uncover that connection and determine if both planets could be colonized. Commander Briggs, a voice crackled through her earpiece. We were nearing Zethra, 15 minutes until landing. Sarah tightened the straps on her suit and turned toward the cockpit. Acknowledged, Lieutenant Kim, bring us in smoothly. We can teach the Ford a rough entry. As she entered the cockpit, Lieutenant Rachel Kim Entz moved confidently over the control. Her eyes flickered between the blinking lights on the dashboard and the looming image of Zethra through the viewport. The planet surface glowed orange and red, swirling with sandstorms that whipped across the barren landscape. I've never seen anything like this, Rachel muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah took a seat beside her, none of us half it. Hope you're ready for what sent down there. The horizon descended through the atmosphere, the hull rattling as the desert winds battered the ship. Outside Zethras, sun scorched the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. Despite the planet's inhospitable appearance, sensors had confirmed the presence of breathable air and water sources deep underground. As the ship touched down, the landing gear sunk slightly into the sandy soil. Sarah's pulse quickened. This was it. The beginning of humanity's next chapter in space exploration. Prepare for deployment, she ordered over the comm. Zethra team, you were up. Nevo's team, stand by for your drop. The crew moved like clockwork, gathering equipment and strapping on their exosuit. Sarah watched as Dr. Ellen Rivera, the mission's lead astrobiologist, prepped his gear. He was a tall man with a quiet intensity, his mind always a few steps ahead of the conversation. Dr. Rivera, Sarah called out as he adjusted his oxygen mask. You ready for this? He gave her a small nod. If the data we collected from orbit is accurate, Zethra's ecosystem is unlike anything we've ever seen. I am more than ready. Sarah's eyes lingered on him a moment longer. There was something about Rivera that always put her on edge, his single-minded obsession with discovery. She respected it even if it made her uneasy. The doors to the airlock hissed open, and the Zethra team stepped onto the planet's surface. The heat hit them immediately, even through their suits. The wind howled, carrying fine grains of sand that scratched against their visor. Visibility slow, Lieutenant Kim reported through the comms from the ship. You are going to want to stick close to base camp until the storm dies down. Understood, Sarah replied. We'll start with short-range exploration. Dr. Rivera, you are leading the initial survey. The scientist activated his scanning equipment, sweeping the device over the ground. Temperature is fluctuating more than we expected. There's a lot of geothermal activity beneath the surface. We might be standing on a massive underground energy source. Let's not jump to conclusions yet, Sarah cautioned. Focus on gathering data. As they moved away from the ship, the landscape revealed itself in more detail. Rocky outcroppings jutted out from the sand like skeletal remains of ancient creatures, their surfaces etched with deep grooves, possibly from centuries of wind erosion. The ground was unstable in places, cracking beneath their feet as if something was shifting far below. Suddenly, a deep rumble vibrated through the ground. What the hell was that? Lieutenant Kimsel's voice crackled over the comm. Sarah felt the tremor through her boots. Everyone stay alert. That did feel like a normal quake. Rivera knelt and placed a sensor on the ground, watching as data streamed across his tablet. It's coming from beneath us. There's something massive down there, an energy pulse of some kind. Sarah's brow furrowed. Could it be related to the connection between Zethra and Nivo? Possibly, Rivera said, standing up, but we won't know for sure until we investigate further. We need to get underground. Sarah was about to respond when her earpiece crackled to life again. Commander Briggs, we've got a problem on Nivo. It was Dr. Ellie Warren, the geologist leading the Nivo's team. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Go ahead, Dr. Warren. What's that situation? We've uncovered something strange beneath the ice. It looks like a structure artificial, but it's buried deep. We're losing comments with the rest of the team. The storms are getting worse. Sarah's mind raced. 2 planets, 2 mysteries, one connected to energy, the other to ancient structure. Whatever was happening on Zethra was directly affecting Nivo's, but hold your position, Dr. Warren. We'll regroup and assess the situation. She turned to Rivera, her jaw set. We need answers, and fast. Meanwhile, on Nivo's, the icy winds screamed against the team, suits as they trudged through knee-deep snow. Dr. Ellie Warren Schront's hands trembled as she scanned the ground beneath her feet. The equipment beeped wildly, confirming what she suspected. There was something down there deep beneath the frozen surface. Lieutenant Adams, bring over the seismic scanner, she ordered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Adams, a tall man with a square jaw, struggled to pull the scanner through the snowdrift. This better be worth it. Doc, I am freezing my ass off out here. Warren ignored his complaints and activated the device. The display lit up, showing a series of hollow chambers and tunnels, stretching out beneath the ice, far deeper than any natural cave system should go. "This isn't too normal," she whispered, her breath fogging up her visor. "Something someone built there." Before she could investigate further, the ice beneath her feet shifted. A loud crack echoed through the air as the ground began to collapse. "Move," now Warren shouted, diving away from the fissure that opened beneath her. Adams followed, barely managing to avoid falling into the chasm. The ground shook violently as the storm intensified, burying their equipment under a fresh layer of snow. Warren's heart pounded as she grabbed her comm unit. "Horizon, this is Nivo's team. We were in trouble. The ground is unstable, and the storm is getting worse. We need immediate support." Static crackled over the line, but Sarah's sound voice eventually cut through. "Hang tight, Warren. We reworking on it. Etc. It's not exactly stable either." Warren clenched her fists. Whatever was happening, it was beyond anything they had prepared for. Back on Zethra, the tremors had worsened. Sandstorms swirled violently around the team as they tried to make their way back to the ship. "Commander, we need to retreat." Lieutenant Kim Sat's voice crackled through the comm. "The storm's too strong." Sarah gritted her teeth. "We were almost there. Keep pushing forward." Just as they neared the base camp, a massive gust of wind knocked Rivera off his feet. He tumbled down a steep dune, disappearing from sight. "Rivera," Sarah shouted, running toward where he'd fallen. She found him at the bottom of the dune, half buried in sand, but miraculously unharmed. He was staring at something, a strange metallic object protruding from the ground. "What is it?" Sarah asked, helping him to his feet. Rivera brushed off the sand and knelt beside the object. This could be it. "The source of the energy we've been detecting. It's an ancient commander. We need to excavate it." Sarah looked up at the darkening sky, the storm swirling around them. "Not now. We need to get back to base and regroup." "Well, come back for it." Rivera hesitated, clearly torn, but he finally nodded. "Agreed." "But we can wait too long. Whatever calls happening to these planets is accelerating." As they made their way back to the ship, Sarah's mind raced. Both planets were in danger, and the clock was ticking if they didn't find a way to restore balance between Zephyr and Nivo soon. The entire mission, and possibly their lives, would be lost. Back inside the Horizon, the storm raged against the ship hull, a constant reminder of the hostile environment outside. Sarah paced in the command room, her mind racing. Both planets were in peril, but the link between them was still a puzzle. Every moment wasted brought them closer to disaster. Lieutenant Kim entered the room, her face grim. "Commander, the storm on Zethara isn't letting up, and Nivos is getting worse too. Communications with the Nivos team are intermittent. They were trapped underground, and the ice caverns are unstable. We need to make a decision." Sarah turned sharply. "We've uncovered ancient technology on Zephyr. Rivera believes it could be the key to restoring balance between the two planets. But we can't do anything without coordinating with the Nivos team." Kim's eyes narrowed. "What if we don't have time? Nivos could collapse before we figure out what's going on." Sarah hesitated, her mind spinning with possibilities. The weight of the entire mission, perhaps the survival of both planets, rested on her shoulders. Every instinct told her they had to act fast, but without knowing the full picture, rushing could be catastrophic. She hit the comms, "Dr. Warren. Report what says your status." Static filled the line before Warren's voice broke through. "We're trapped underground, but we've found something. There are structures here, Commander, built by an ancient civilization. I think they were the ones who created the connection between the planet." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Do you think the technology you found can stabilize both planets?" "I don't know yet. We were still trying to access the deeper layers of the structure. But whatever it is, it's still thousands of years, maybe more." Sarah glanced at Kim. "Get Dr. Rivera in here now." Minutes later, Rivera stood in the command room, his face a mix of exhaustion and excitement. He was covered in dust from Zethara sandstorms, but his eyes were alight with discovery. "We found a conduit on Zethara," Rivera began, his voice rapid. "It sets ancient technology designed to harness the geothermal energy beneath the planet. I believe it's part of a larger system, one that connects the two planets and maintains the balance between them." "Balance?" Sarah asked, leaning forward.
"Exactly.
"These planets aren't just coexisting, they're interdependent. The technology keeps Zethra's heat in check while regulating Nivos' height. Without it, both planets would eventually destabilize. The storms, the seismic activity, it sank all because the system is failing. Sarah processed the information. So how do we fix it? Rivera Ann's face darkened. That's then a problem. The system sounds ancient and it's deteriorating. The conduits on both planets need to be reactivated, but it's risky. If we make a mistake, we could accelerate the collapse instead of preventing it. Sarah stood, her mind made up. We don't have a choice. We'll activate the conduit on Zethra and coordinate with Warren's team on Nivos. We need to restore the connection. Kim looked concerned. And if it doesn't work, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Sarah replied, her voice steady, but we need to try. As the team prepared for the mission, Sarah knew the odds weren't in their favor. The technology was old, fragile, and poorly understood, but it was the only shot they had. Outside, the storm continued to rage as Sarah, Rivera, and a small team returned to the excavation site. The metallic object they had uncovered was now partially exposed, revealing a massive structure buried deep in the sand. Rivera worked quickly, attaching diagnostic tools to the exposed surface, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is it, he muttered, almost to himself. This is the heart of the system. Sarah's scum crackled to life again. Commander Briggs it, swore. We've then managed to reach the control center beneath Nivel's surface. There are panels here, some kind of ancient interface. We were trying to figure out how to reactivate it, but it's delicate. One wrong move, and we could trigger a collapse. Sarah responded quickly. We in the same situation here. We will activate the Zethra conduit, but we need to do it in sync with you. If both sides aren't reactivated simultaneously, the system could overload. Warren's voice was tense. Understood. We'll be ready. Rivera continued to work, sweat pouring down his face despite the arid air. Haas, looking up at Sarah, we need to divert power from the horizon to jumpstart the system. Stress only way. Sarah nodded, though the thought made her stomach turn. Diverting power meant risking the ship core systems, including life support. But there was another option. Do it, she ordered. Kim's voice crackled through the comms commander. Are you sure if we lose power to the ship? I am sure, Sarah cut in. This is what we came here to do. We save these planets, or we die trying. The team worked quickly, connecting power cables from the ship to the ancient conduit. The ground rumbled beneath them as the ancient machinery slowly came to life. Lights flickered across the surface of the structure, and Rivera's face lit up in triumph. It's all working, he shouted. Be ready to activate. Sarah hit the comm Warren. We read in position. Are you ready on your end? Almost Warren replied, her voice strained. We were getting readings from the control panel. There's an energy surge building it. It's got to be now or never. Sarah's hand hovered over the activation switch on my mark. 3, 2, 1, activate. She slammed the switch, and the conduit roared to life. A massive pulse of energy shot through the ground, sending shockwaves rippling across the desert. The sky above them flickered, the storm momentarily pausing as the system reestablished its connection. Warren, what is happening on Nivos? Sarah called out, her heart racing. There was a pause before Warren's voice came back, breathless. It's not working. The ice caverns are stabilizing. The system is... Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air, and the ground beneath Sarah's feet lurched violently. She stumbled, barely catching herself, as the conduit shuddered and groaned. Something isn't wrong, Rivera shouted, his hands flying over the controls. The system sat overloading. Sarah's mind raced. They had done everything right, so why was it failing then? It hit her. The technology was too old, too degraded. It couldn't handle the strain of reactivation. Shut it down, she yelled. We need to shut it down before it... But it was too late. A massive explosion ripped through the air, and the conduit collapsed in on itself, sending a shockwave that threw the entire team to the ground. Sarah's ears rang as she struggled to her feet, her vision blurred. Commander, are you okay? Kinsek's voice crackled over the comm, barely audible through the static. I'm fine, Sarah gasped, struggling to regain her bearings. But the conduit, it's gone. Rivera was on his knees, staring at the wreckage, his face pale. We failed. Sarah clenched her fists, her heart sinking. All their efforts, all the risks they had taken, it had all been for nothing. But then a strange sound reached her ears, a low hum, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the ground. She glanced at Rivera, who looked equally confused. What is that? Rivera's eyes widened in realization. It stopped the system. It's still active underground. The explosion did destroy it completely. Its search regenerated. Sarah's mind raced. The system was older than they could have ever imagined, but it had been designed to withstand even the worst disasters. It's still functioning, still working to restore the balance between the two planets. We haven't failed yet, she said, her voice filled with new determination. We still have a chance. We just need to give it time. Warren's voice crackled through the calm, Nivos stabilizing. Whatever happened on Zethra, it worked. The planets, they rebalancing each other out again. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had restored the connection. She looked at Rivera, who was staring at the wreckage with the mix of awe and exhaustion. Let's head back to the ship, she said softly. Our work here is done. As they made their way back to the horizon, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace wash over her.
The mission had been dangerous, and they had come close to losing everything.
But in the end, they had succeeded. The planets would live on, their mysterious connection preserved, and humanity had taken its first steps toward a new frontier. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The horizon sliced through the inky blackness of space, silver hull gleaming in the light of distant stars. Inside, Captain Serena Cole sat in her command chair, eyes fixed on the endless void ahead. The colony fleet had been traveling for months now, charting the outer reaches of the known universe. Their mission to establish new colonies on planets that had been deemed habitable but had yet to be explored by humankind. With the Vanguard and Solace trailing behind, they were the first explorers of this new frontier. Serena glanced at the holographic screen displaying the ship's status. All systems were operational, but something gnawed at the back of her mind. The vast emptiness they were traversing felt different, thicker somehow, as though the very fabric of space was shifting. She brushed the thought aside. Space travel always came with uncertainties, and she had a crew to lead. Captain, we've picked up an anomaly ahead. Dr. Malik Tennyson's voice crackled over the intercom. The ship's lead scientist Tennyson had a tendency to overanalyze, but this time his tone carried an edge that piqued Serena's curiosity. Details, Doctor? Serena replied, leaning forward in her chair. Tennyson's face appeared on the holoscreen, his brows furrowed. We read detecting a spatial distortion about 100,000 kilometers ahead. The readings are strange. It doesn't match anything in our database. Strange how? Serena asked, frowning. Is it a threat? I don't know. Tennyson admitted itself, not like any natural phenomenon we've ever encountered. It could be some kind of gravitational rift, but it's emitting energy signatures I've never seen before. The distortion seems to be warping space-time itself. Serena's saddies shifted to the display, where a shimmering rift had formed ahead of the fleet. It wasn't a black hole or a wormhole, nothing like the anomalies they'd encountered before. It looked almost alive, swirling patterns of light twisted within the rift, pulling at the edges of space as though inviting them in. Can we go around it? Serena asked, though she already suspected the answer. Unlikely, Tennyson replied. It's expanding. If we wait too long, we might not be able to avoid it. Serena clenched her jaw, prepared the ship for possible impact. She ordered Lieutenant Moss, set a course through the rift. AI Captain came, Lieutenant Kara Moss, sang calm voice from the helm. The pilot's hands moved swiftly over the controls, guiding the horizon directly toward the anomaly. The ship's engines hummed as it surged forward as they neared the rift. The lights inside the cockpit flickered, and the air itself seemed to hum with energy. Serena gripped the armrests of her chair, her heart pounding. She had led her crew through dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This felt wrong. The rift loomed larger on the screen, a swirling vortex of color and light. The ship shuddered as it entered the edge of the anomaly for a moment. Everything was still. Then, without warning, the horizon was yanked forward, as though caught in the grip of some unseen force. Serena's vision blurred as the ship was pulled into the heart of the rift. When Serena opened her eyes, the bridge was deathly silent. The hum of the engines was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. She blinked, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Report, she ordered, her voice hoarse. No response. She glanced around the bridge. Her crew sat at their stations, but something was off. They were staring straight ahead, eyes vacant as if frozen in time. Serena pushed herself to her feet, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. She stumbled toward Lieutenant Moss, who sat rigidly at the helm. Kara, Serena called, shaking her shoulder. Kara blinked, her eyes slowly focusing on Serena. Captain, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What just happened? I don't know, Serena replied, her own voice trembling, but we need to find out. The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a view of the space outside. But what Serena saw made her blood run cold. They were no longer in the familiar star-studded void. Instead, they were surrounded by a swirling, luminous haze. There were no stars, no planets, no points of reference, just an endless expanse of shifting light and shadow. What the hell is this? Kara muttered, her hands moving over the control. The navigation systems aren't responding. I cannot get a fix on our location. Dr. Tennyson, report to the bridge. Serena ordered through the intercom. She needed answers, and fast. Moments later, Tennyson appeared, his expression grim. Captain, I've been analyzing the data. This region we've entered, it's not just some anomaly. It's an entirely different space, governed by different laws of physics. What are you saying, Doctor? Serena asked, though. She already dreaded the answer. I am saying that we are not in normal space anymore, Tennyson replied. This region is controlled by some kind of energy field, and it's warping our perception of reality. We might not be able to trust what we were seeing. Serena's stomach twisted. How do we get out? Tennyson shook his head. I don't know. We need more data. As the hours dragged on, the effects of the anomaly became more apparent. Crew members began reporting strange phenomena, hallucinations, voices, shadows that shouldn't be there. At first, Serena dismissed it as stress, but soon the entire ship was affected. Even she wasn't immune. Late one night, while reviewing sensor logs in her quarters, Serena felt a presence behind her. She turned sharply, but the room was empty still. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could have sworn she'd heard someone whisper her name. The hallucinations grew worse. Lieutenant Moss reported seeing her dead brother walking the corridors, smiling at her as though he had never died. Engineer Liam Rook, the ship's head technician, claimed that parts of the ship were shifting corridors that should have led to engineering now opened into storage bays, and sections of the ship seemed to change size. Serena tried to hold the crew together, but morale was crumbling. Every time she thought she'd gotten a handle on things, something new would happen, a burst of static on the intercom, a door that wouldn't open, crew members vanishing only to reappear hours later with no memory of where they'd been. And then they lost contact with the Vanguard. One moment, the other ship had been trailing them, sending routine updates. The next, it was gone. No wreckage, no distress signal, just gone. Serena stared at the empty space on the screen where the Vanguard should have been. Her hands trembling. This can't be happening, she whispered to herself. But it was. Dr. Tennyson grew increasingly obsessed with studying the anomaly, spending hours in his lab analyzing the energy signature. He claimed that the energy field wasn't just distorting space, but time as well. We could be trapped in some kind of temporal loop, he suggested one day, his eyes wide with exhaustion, reliving the same moments over and over without realizing it. Serena wasn't sure whether to believe him or to write it off as paranoia. But deep down, she felt the same disquiet. Time didn't feel right. The days seemed to blur together, each one indistinguishable from the last. We need a way out, Doctor, she said firmly, trying to anchor herself in the present. Whatever this is, we can stay here. Tennyson nodded, though. His eyes remained distant. I am working on it, Captain. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Moss had begun to develop her own theory. She had noticed that certain parts of the ship seemed immune to the shifting space, places where the core systems were most stable. If we can focus on what we know is real, maybe we can disrupt the illusions, she suggested during one of the increasingly desperate strategy meetings. Serena seized on the idea, desperate for anything that might give them a foothold in the chaotic reality they found themselves in. What do you need? Control over the ship's core systems, Moss replied. I can isolate the unaffected areas, keep us grounded in what says real. But I'll need Rook's help to bypass some of the failing systems. Serena nodded. As Moss and Rook worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship, Serena found herself drifting deeper into her own thought. The voices in her head grew louder, more insistent, whispering things she didn't want to hear. Memories she had long buried began to resurface, old regrets, past failures, the weight of all the lives she had lost under her command. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over her mind. She couldn't afford to lose focus now, not when her crew was depending on her. The final straw came when the Solace went dark. One moment it had been sending intermittent updates, reporting the same strange phenomena. the horizon was experiencing. The next, its signal was lost entirely, as if the ship had never existed. Serena stood on the bridge, staring at the empty void where the solace should have been. "We were running out of time," she muttered under her breath. Moss and Rook had made progress in stabilizing parts of the ship, but it wasn't high enough. The energy field was growing stronger, its influence seeping into every corner of the horizon. Reality itself was unraveling, and Serena knew that if they didn't find a way out soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. "I like that something," Tennyson announced one morning, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "A way to disrupt the field." Serena's heart leaped. "What is it?" "We need to overload the ship's core," Tennyson explained. "Create a controlled explosion that should destabilize the energy field long enough for us to open a rift and escape." "That's suicide," Moss said bluntly. "The core says already unstable. We could destroy the entire ship." "We don't have a choice." Tennyson shot back. "The longer we stay here, the more likely we are to lose everything. This is our only shot." Serena's mind raced. It was a desperate plan, but what other option did they have? The Vanguard and Solace were gone, swallowed by the anomaly. If they stayed, they would be next. Serena stared at Tennyson, weighing their options. The air on the bridge felt thick, as if the ship itself were holding its breath, waiting for her command. Every instinct told her to stop, to protect her crew, but the harsh reality was that there was no safety here. They were on borrowed time, and that time was running out. "Do it," she said, finally, her voice low but resolute. "Prepare the core for overload." Tennyson nodded, already moving toward his console to execute the necessary command. Moss shot Serena a glance that was a mixture of disbelief and grim acceptance, but she didn't argue. They all knew what was at stake. Rook arrived on the bridge just as the orders were relayed to the engineering team. "You were really going to blow the core?" he asked, incredulous. "Captain, we were talking about destabilizing the one thing keeping us from falling apart." Serena met his gaze. "And if we don't tell, we will end up like the Vanguard and the Solid. Whatever that thing is out there, it's consuming us. We either fight back or we die." Rook exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Fine," he muttered, glancing at Moss. "Let's make sure we survive the explosion then." Moss and Rook worked quickly, their hands moving over the controls with practiced efficiency. Tennyson monitored the energy field, his eyes flickering between the data streams on his console and the shifting patterns of light outside the ship. The tension in the room was palpable, each person acutely aware that a single mistake could spell their end. As the core began to destabilize, the ship's systems groaned under the strain. Lights flickered on and off, and the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, as if the horizon were alive and protesting what they were about to do. Serena clenched her fists, trying to block out the rising whispers in her mind. She couldn't afford to lose focus now, not when they were so close. Then, just as the core reached critical levels, Tennyson shouted, "Now, initiate the overload." Rook slammed his hand down on the console, triggering the sequence. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Serena off her feet as the core erupted in a burst of energy. For a split second, it felt as though the entire ship was tearing apart at the seam. The air was filled with the sound of groaning metal and the screech of alarms, but then silent. Serena's breath caught in her throat as she looked around, waiting for the inevitable destruction. But it didn't come. Instead, the view screen showed something miraculous. The swirling vortex of energy outside the ship had collapsed, and in its place was a shimmering tear in space. It was small, barely stable, but it was their way out. "Lieutenant Moss, take us through," Serena ordered, pulling herself up and steadying her voice now. Moss, despite the chaos around her, was calm as ever, her hands deftly guiding the horizon toward the rift. The ship groaned under the strain of the core's instability, but Moss did not falter. As they neared the tier, the ship began to accelerate, drawn toward the opening by some unseen force. The moment they passed through the rift, everything changed. The ship lurched violently, and for a moment Serena's vision went black. When her sight returned, she found herself gripping the armrest of her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. Around her, the bridge was still intact, though the crew looked just as shaken as she felt. The view screen flickered back to life, revealing the familiar sight stars. Real, tangible stars, not the shifting illusions they had been trapped in. Serena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had made it. "We're back in normal space," Moss confirmed, her voice thick with relief. Serena nodded, though her body was still tense, as if expecting something to go wrong. She couldn't let herself relax just yet. Status report, she ordered. Rook checked the ship's system's core cells, barely holding together, but stable. For now, we took a lot of damage, but we realized. Tennyson stared at his console, eyes wide with disbelief. The energy field ... deets gone.
We were clear.
Serena leaned back in her chair, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The horizon was a shadow of the ship it had once been, but they had escaped. They had survived, and that for now was enough. The crew was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts as the reality of their situation began to sink in. The losses had been heavy both in lives and in morale, but they were still here, still fighting, and that had to mean something. As the hours passed, the ship's systems were slowly brought back online, and the crew began to assess the damage. Reports came in from the remaining sections of the ship, confirming that they were still operational, though barely. The ship's sense hull was riddled with fractures, and several key systems were offline, but they were alive. Serena stood by the view screen, staring out at the stars. They had come so far, faced so much, and yet there was still so much ahead of them. The galaxy was vast, and they were but a small ship drifting through its endless expanse. But now more than ever, Serena knew they had to keep moving forward. Dr. Tennyson approached her, his face pale and drawn. "Captain, I still don't understand what that energy field was. It defied every law of physics. We know I think it was just some anomaly." Serena did respond right away. She had been thinking about the same thing ever since they had escaped. The energy field had felt alive in some way, as though it had been aware of their presence, manipulating their perceptions, feeding on their fear and confusion. But what had it been, and more importantly, had they truly escaped it? "I don't know, Doctor," she said, finally, her voice low, "but whatever it was, we were out of its reach now." Tennyson nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes remained. "I suppose we may never know." Serena glanced back. At the view screen, the stars were steady, constant, a far cry from the chaos they had just escaped. But even as she watched, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking just beyond the edges of their perception. "We'll chart a new course," she said, her voice steady, "and we'll keep moving." Tennyson left her side, returning to his console as the crew continued their work. For now, they were safe. But deep down, Serena knew that their journey was far from over. The universe was vast, filled with unknowns, and they had only scratched the surface. As she stood there, watching the stars, she couldn't help but wonder what else was waiting for them out there in the dark. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The desert stretched out in all directions, endless waves of sand, bleached white under the brutal sun. Captain Elena Greer stood at the edge of the ridge, visor down, shielding her eyes from the fierce winds that carried tiny razor-sharp grains of dust. Exanthus, the abandoned world, no life, no water, no chance for colonization, yet here they were. She squinted into the horizon, watching as the last shuttle disappeared from view, leaving her and her team behind to explore the surface. The planet had been classified as dead for decades, but new data suggested there was something worth investigating. The higher-ups back on Earth had made their orders clear. Find out what's out there. Alina, a voice crackled in her earpiece, snapping her from her thought. Dr. Marcus Heller's voice, of course, impatient, eager, and filled with the excitement that only a scientist could muster in such desolation. "You were going to want to see this." She sighed, her instincts gnawing at her gut. Heller had been on edge since they arrived, jittery, with excitement, and that always made her nervous. As the team leader, her job was to keep things in check, not let the enthusiasm of discovery override their safety protocol. With a glance at the sandy expanse, she turned and made her way down the ridge. Heller was bent over the small scanner in front of him, its light blinking steadily. Around him, the rest of the crew, Jacob, the security officer, Sarah, the young mechanic, and the other specialists milled about, unpacking gear and setting up their base camp. As Alina approached, she could see Heller's fingers tapping excitedly on the side of the scanner. "What is it, Heller?" she asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of her voice. She wasn't in the mood for wild goose chases. "He didn't look up. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. I need you to see it for yourself." He held out a small vial of dust, so fine it shimmered in the fading sunlight. "I think I found something." Elena crossed her arms. "Dust, Heller, the whole planet is made of it." He looked up at her, his eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Not just dust, like Her heart skipped a beat. Life in this wasteland. Look closer, he said, offering her the scanner. Under the surface, beneath all this sand, there is something alive. The readings are off the charts, unlike anything I've ever seen. She leaned over the scanner, watching the data scroll by. At first, it was hard to make sense of just numbers and read out. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw it, a pulse, something moving, something living beneath the sand. It was faint, almost undetectable, but it was there, alive. What is it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know, Heller admitted, but I'm going to find out. By the time the second sun had set, the team had excavated a small area around their camp. The sand, once seemingly endless, had begun to give way to something deeper, something almost crystalline beneath the surface. It was hard to see, but it glimmered faintly in the light of their headlamp. Heller was crouched low, running his fingers through the strange material.
It's like nothing I've ever seen. You remember? His voice reverent. It's so beautiful.
Alina knelt beside him, her curiosity getting the better of her. She could see it too now, the way the sand seemed to shift and move as if it were alive. She reached out, hesitant at first, but then more boldly, her fingers brushing against the surface. The moment her skin touched the dust, she felt it, a spark like static electricity shooting up her arm. She jerked back, eyes wide. What does she gasp? Heller's eyes glinted with excitement. You felt it, didn't you? I don't know what I felt, she admitted. It was like nothing she'd ever experienced. A connection, brief but undeniable, as if the dust had reached out to her, testing, probing. What is this? How? I think he said, his voice low and intense. We've discovered something that could change everything. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to uncover more of the dust creatures, as they had begun to call them. The tiny, almost invisible particles seemed to respond to human contact, shifting and pulsing with a strange kind of energy whenever anyone touched them. They were small, microscopic, even, but there was no doubt they were alive and intelligent. It wasn't too long before Heller devised a way to connect more deeply with the creature. Using a small neural interface, he was able to amplify the connection, allowing the creatures to bond with the human nervous system. It was risky, experimental at best, but Heller was too excited to wait. I am going to try it, he announced one morning, his face alight with enthusiasm. Alina shook her head. Heller, we don't know enough about these things. You can just go plugging them into your brain and hope for the best. Come on, Alina, he said, grinning. Where's your sense of adventure? This isn't her about adventure, she snapped. It's not about safety. We don't know what these things are capable of. I know enough, Heller shot back. I've run the tests. They're not dangerous, at least not in the way you were thinking. They want to connect. They need us as much as we need them. Alina's eyes narrowed. Need us for what? Heller shrugged. Who knows? But we were about to find out. Before she could stop him, he pressed the small device to his temple, activating the neural link. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, his eyes fluttered closed, and a soft smile spread across his face. I can feel them, he whispered. It's ... incredible. Alina took a step back, her heart pounding. This was wrong. She could feel it in her gut. But Heller was too far gone, too deep into his obsession to listen to reason. Over the next few hours, the changes were subtle but undeniable. Heller moved with a newfound grace, his reflexes sharper, his mind quicker. He could solve complex problems in seconds, and his strength seemed to increase tenfold. The dust creatures were enhancing him, giving him abilities beyond what any human was capable of. At first, the others were skeptical, but it didn't take long for them to follow suit. Sarah was the next to try the neural link, then Jacob, and soon, most of the team had bonded with the creature. Their abilities grew stronger with each passing day, and the one simple task of surviving on the harsh desert planet became effortless. Alina, however, kept her distance. She didn't trust any of it. There was something about the way the creatures moved, the way they seemed to watch, to listen. It was as if they were learning, adapting to the humans, waiting for something. And then the dream started. It began with Sarah. She woke in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, her skin clammy with sweat. When Alina rushed to her side, the young mechanic was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. I saw something, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling in the dust. It was ... It was watching me. Alina frowned. What do you mean, what was watching you? I don't know, Sarah said, clutching her blanket tightly, but it was in my head. It felt wrong, like it was inside me. Alina's heart sank. She had known something like this would happen. The connection wasn't natural, it was dangerous. Over the next few days, more of the team began reporting similar experiences. Vivid dreams, nightmares even, where the dust creatures seemed to invade their minds, whispering strange thoughts, filling them with a sense of unease. Heller, of course, brushed it off, insisting that it was just their bodies adjusting to the bond. "It's nothing to worry about," he said with a wave of his hand. "The creatures are simply communicating with us. It's all part of the process." But Alina wasn't too convinced. The more she observed, the more she noticed subtle changes in the team. Their behavior became erratic, their moods shifting unpredictably. Jacob, once calm and collected, grew more aggressive, snapping at anyone who questioned him. Sarah became withdrawn, avoiding contact with the others. Even Heller, who had always been sharp and focused, began to show signs of paranoia. It was clear to Alina that the dust creatures were not as benign as they seemed. One night, as the winds howled outside their makeshift camp, Alina sat alone in the control room, reviewing the old data logs she found earlier. The previous mission to Exanthus had been small, just a handful of explorers sent to survey the planet. The logs were sparse, filled mostly with mundane details about the environment, but one entry caught her attention. "We've made contact," the log read. "The creatures are intelligent, far more than we anticipated. But there's something off. I fear we may have made a mistake in allowing them to bond with us. They seem to be feeding on our thoughts, our emotions. I can feel them inside my mind. I am not sure how much longer I can." The log ended abruptly. Elena's blood ran cold. She had been right all along. The creatures were feeding on them, using the connection to manipulate their mind. And if they didn't stop it soon, they would lose themselves entirely. She had to act, in fact. Alina stared at the incomplete data log, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd been right to be cautious. Whatever these creatures were, they were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Feeding on thoughts and emotions, they were using the colonists as more than just hosts. They were slowly taking over their mind. She knew she had to act quickly. If the team was already starting to show signs of the creature's influence, it wouldn't be long before they lost control completely. But convincing them to break the bond would be nearly impossible. Most of them were too far gone, especially Heller. He had become obsessed, almost zealously convinced that the dust creatures were humanity's self-future. Alina pushed back from the control panel, running a hand through her short hair. She needed a plan. If she could get Sarah on her side, maybe they could sabotage the neural links and sever the connection. But with the others so deeply entrenched, it would be dangerous, and Heller wouldn't let them go without a fight. She stood and grabbed her communicator, switching to a private channel. "Sarah, it's Sully. Alina, meet me in the storage bay now." There was a brief pause before Sarah's voice crackled through the static. "On my way." Alina slipped out of the control room, moving quickly and quietly down the narrow corridors of the bay. The others were asleep, or at least they appeared to be in truth. Alina had no idea if they even slept anymore. Heller had been spending long hours awake, connected to the creatures, his mind drifting deeper into the bond. When Alina reached the storage bay, Sarah was already there, leaning against a stack of crates. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and haunted. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, but Alina knew it wasn't just exhaustion. The creatures were taking their toll on her and time was running out. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice low and nervous. "Why the secrecy?" Alina took a deep breath. "I found something old data logs from the previous mission. The team that was here before us, they made contact with the creatures, the same way we did. But it went wrong. They lost control." Sarah's eyes widened. "What do you mean, lost control?" "The creatures," Alina explained, "they were not just giving us ability. They were feeding on us, our thoughts, our emotions. The bond is deeper than we realized, and it's only going to get worse." Sarah stared at her, processing the information. "So what do we do?" "We need to break the connection," Alina said firmly. "Sever the neural links and destroy the devices. If we don't, we'll end up like the last team." Sarah looked down at the floor, her hands trembling, but Heller. "He won't let us. He thinks the creatures are the key to everything. He's not going to give up that easily." "I know," Alina said grimly. "That's why we need to act fast before he realizes what we're doing. Are you with me?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I am with you." Alina felt a surge of relief. "Good, we'll start with the neural interfaces. We need to disable them all at once, before anyone can react. Heller says the most dangerous right now, so we'll have to be careful." Together, they moved through the storage bay, gathering the tools they would need to dismantle the neural interfaces. It was risky, but it was their only option. If they didn't T-act, now they would lose their chance. As they worked, Elena's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though the others were still asleep. The creatures were everywhere in the air. In the sand, it was as if the whole planet was alive, and it knew what they were planning. Once they had everything they needed, they made their way back to the sleeping quarters. The team was scattered around the room, their bodies still but their faces twitching slightly in their sleep. Elena knew they were connected to the creatures even in their unconscious state. It was unsettling, the way they seemed to exist in two worlds at once. They approached Heller's bunk first. He was the biggest threat, and if they could disable his neural link before he woke up, they'd have a better chance of succeeding. Sarah crouched down next to him, her hands shaking as she reached for the interface device on his temple. Elena held her breath, watching carefully. She knew they had to move quickly, but any sudden movement could wake him. Sarah's fingers brushed the edge of the device, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then with a soft click, the interface detached from Heller's skin. Elena let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The moment the device was removed, Heller's eyes snapped open, wide and furious. He moved faster than Elena could react, his hand shooting out to grab Sarah's wrist, twisting it painfully. "What the hell are you doing?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah yelped in pain, and Elena stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Heller, listen to me. The creatures are controlling us. They're feeding off of us, using us. We have to stop this before it's too late." "Heller," as grip tightened on Sarah's wrist, his eyes wild with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snarled. "The creatures are helping us. They were giving us power more than we could ever imagine. You were trying to take that away from me." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the madness in his eyes, the way the bond had twisted his mind. There was no reasoning with him now. He was too far gone. "Heller, please," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "This isn't to you. The creatures are manipulating you." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I don't understand what's happening. They were not controlling me. I am controlling them. I am stronger than they are." Elena glanced at Sarah, who was still struggling in his grip. "They were running out of time. We don't have to do this," Elena said. Taking a step forward, "Let her go. We can still fix this." Heller's eyes flicked to Elena, and for a brief moment she thought he might listen. But then his expression hardened, and he threw Sarah to the ground with a snarl. "You don't understand," he spat. "None of you understand. The creatures are the future. They were going to make us God." Before Elena could react, Heller lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat. She barely had time to move, ducking out of the way just as his fingers grazed her skin. He was faster, stronger than he should have been. The creatures had enhanced him beyond anything she had expected. Sarah scrambled to her feet, clutching her wrist in pain. "Elena, we have to get out of here." Elena nodded, her heart racing. They couldn't fight Heller, not like this. They had to retreat and come up with a new plan together. They bolted for the door, Heller's furious shouts echoing behind them. As they ran through the narrow corridors of the base, Elena's mind raced. They had failed to disable Heller's Sciencefiction, and now he was more dangerous than ever. Worse, the creatures knew what they were planning. They were inside Heller's sound, mind feeding him power, manipulating him. They reached the control room, slamming the door shut behind them. Elena locked it, her hands shaking. Sarah leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, her face pale with fear. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Elena didn't have an answer. They were trapped, and Heller was hunting them. The only option left was to destroy the creatures at the source. But how the entire planet was covered in the dust, and they had no idea how deep the connection went. As she stared at the control panel, an idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, insanely risky, but it might be their only chance. If they could overload the power grid, they could generate an explosion large enough to destroy the surface of the planet. It would take out the creatures in the base, but it would also give them a chance to escape. "Elena," Sarah asked, her voice shaky, "what are you thinking?" Elena turned to her, her eyes hard with determination. "We were going to blow up the planet." Sarah blinked, her mouth opening in shock. "You're serious?" Elena nodded. "It said the only way, if we don't eat, the creatures will take over. They'll spread, and it won't just be us. They'll find a way to infect others. We can't let that happen." Sarah swallowed hard, fear etched across her face, but she didn't argue. She knew Elena was right. Together, they began working on the plan, racing against the clock as Heller's voice echoed through the base, getting closer with each passing minute. They rigged the power grid to overload, setting the timer for just long enough to give them a chance to escape. When everything was ready, Elena turned to Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is it. We make a run for the shuttle and hope we get out before the planet goes up." Sarah nodded, her face pale, but determined. "Let's do it." They raced through the base, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of Heller's pursuit, his voice twisted with madness. They didn't look back. By the time they reached the shuttle, the countdown had already begun. Elena punched in the launch codes, her fingers trembling as the engines roared to life. The planet beneath them trembled, the power grid beginning to overload. As they soared into the sky, the base exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. The desert planet lit up in flames, the dust creatures vaporized in an instant. Elena and Sarah sat in silence, staring out the window as the planet burned below them. They had won, but the costs had been high. Elena closed her eyes, her thoughts heavy with the weight of their victory. The creatures were gone, but the memory of what they had done would haunt her forever. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The ring world shimmered in the soft light of its central star, an ancient construct orbiting the barren planet below. Humanity had colonized the surface, erecting sleek buildings and mining stations, their metallic surfaces glittering under the eternal daylight. Above them, suspended like a crown around the planet, was the ring, the key to humanity's future. Rich with untapped energy, its resources promised to fuel their expansion into the stars. But few understood the dangers that lurked within its shimmering structure. Dr. Elena Royce stood at the observation deck of the Colony San Main Research Facility, her fingers lightly tapping the transparent wall. She gazed out at the distant ring, unease tightening her chest. For weeks, she had observed subtle anomalies in the ring, ecosystem, tiny disruptions in the energy flows, shifts in the magnetic field. The data didn't lie, something was changing. Elena. She turned to see Captain Jonas Mercer, the leader of the colony's set defense forces, standing in the doorway. His tall, muscular frame filled the space, but his stern face softened slightly when he looked at her. "You're still here," he said, walking over to join her by the window. "You've been working nonstop. Any new finding?" Elena sighed, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I've been running simulations all night. The ring's energy patterns are fluctuating more than ever. It sounds as if something inside it is waking up." Jonas frowned. "Waking up? You were talking about the ecosystem, right?" "I wish I was, but it's more than that." She pointed to a cluster of readings on her tablet. "The ecosystem is collapsing, in some areas plants dying, animals behaving erratically. But the real concern is the energy grid. It's fluctuating at a level we've never seen before. Something deeper is happening." Jonas studied the data, his military instincts kicking in. "Have you alerted the colony council?" "They don't. You see the urgency," Elena replied, her frustration evident. "They're too focused on resource extraction. Corporate wants results, and they don't care about long-term effects." Jonas clenched his jaw. He knew the pressures from corporate interests all too well. "I'll talk to them, but if you rewrite and something's waking up, we need to prepare." Elena nodded, grateful for his support. As Jonas left the room, her gaze drifted back to the ring, its mysterious beauty now tinged with foreboding. Lena Trask wiped the sweat from her brow as she tightened the last bolt on the mining rig stabilizer. The underground tunnels were hot and claustrophobic, the air thick with the hum of machinery. She'd spent the last few weeks supervising the latest mining operations deep within the ring's core, and something about the place unnerved her. Her team had uncovered strange formations within the tunnel structures that didn't seem natural. Biomechanical almost. Lena had reported it, but the corporate overseers brushed it off, urging her to stay on schedule. Profits over anomalies, as usual. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. As the others packed up for the day, she lingered near one of the strange formations, a wall of pulsating material that seemed to breathe. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, and something inside it beckoned her to come closer. Lena approached, reaching out hesitantly. Her fingertips grazed the surface, and suddenly a low hum vibrated through the tunnel. The wall pulsed with energy, glowing faintly as a strange warmth spread through her body. What the heck? Before she could react, The ground trembled violently, and a deafening roar echoed through the tunnel. Miners shouted in alarm as the tunnel walls began to shake. Lena stumbled backward, her heart racing as the floor cracked beneath her feet. "Evacuate," she yelled, sprinting toward the exit. Her voice was drowned out by the sounds of collapsing rock and machinery screeching to a halt. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the pulsating wall, which now throbbed with an intense, almost malevolent energy. Lena barely made it to the surface before the tunnel collapsed behind her. Dust and debris filled the air as she collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Whatever she had touched, whatever had been slumbering within that structure, was now awake. The colony was in chaos. Reports of strange incidents flooded in from across the settlement. Animals behaving erratically, colonists experiencing vivid hallucinations, and entire sections of the ecosystem collapsing into dead zones. It was as if the ring itself had turned hostile. Elena stood in the colony's command center surrounded by anxious scientists and military personnel. Screens displayed images of the unfolding disaster, forests withering, rivers drying up, and strange energy readings spiking across the ring. The once stable environment had been thrown into turmoil. "What's happening out there?" Jonas asked, his voice tense. He stood beside Elena, watching the chaos unfold on the screen. "It's down to the ecosystem," Elena replied, her eyes glued to the data. "The ring's energy is destabilizing, and it says affecting everything, plants, animals, even the colonists. Some kind of biological manipulation is at play." "Biological manipulation?" Jonas' frown deepened. "You mean something is controlling that?" "I don't know," Elena admitted, "but the signs point to an external force. Something ancient, something tied to the ring's energy." Before Jonas could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the far side of the room. Several colonists were shouting, and a man at the back convulsed violently before collapsing to the floor. His body twitched unnaturally, and his eyes rolled back into his head. "Get medical in here," Jonas barked, rushing over to the fallen colonist. But as the medics approached, the man's body went limp, and a chilling silence fell over the room. Elena knelt beside the man, her heart pounding. She placed her fingers on his wrist, checking for a pulse. There was none. "What happened to him?" one of the medics asked, her voice shaking. "I am not sure," Elena whispered, her mind racing. The man's body bore no visible injuries, but his expression, his face frozen in a look of pure terror, told a different story. As she stood up, something cold brushed against her thoughts, a faint whisper at the edge of her consciousness. It was fleeting, barely perceptible, but it left a lingering sense of dread. "Elena," Jonas said quietly, his voice low, "what's going on?" "I think she swallowed her throat dry. I think we're not alone." The following days were a blur of escalating tension. The colony was on the verge of panic as more and more colonists began exhibiting strange behavior, outbursts of violence, bizarre hallucinations, and sudden deaths with no apparent cause. The defense forces were spread thin, struggling to maintain order. Jonas paced the command center, his mind racing with strategies to contain the situation. He'd have seen his fair share of crises in the military, but nothing like this. How do you fight an enemy that invades your mind? "Elena, we need answers," Jonas said, stopping by her workstation. "We're running out of time." "I know," Elena replied, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless night. "I've been studying the energy readings, trying to piece together what else happening. Whatever is controlling the colonists is linked to the ring's energy grid, is ancient, predating human colonization." "So, what is it?" Jonas asked, his frustration mounting. "I believe that as an alien species," Elena said, her voice steady. "A species that once controlled the ring world, using mind control to dominate its inhabitants. When we disrupted the ecosystem, we awoke them. Now they were trying to reclaim what they lost." Jonas stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You were saying we were dealing with mind-controlling alien?" "Exactly." Elena nodded. "They were not just attacking us physically, they were infiltrating our minds, bending us to their will. And we stopped them." "There might be a way," Elena said, glancing at the data on her screen. The ring's energy grid acted as a containment field, keeping the aliens dormant. "If we can reverse the damage caused by the mining operations, we might be able to re-establish the containment." Jonas' jaw tightened. "That's a big if. Elena, do we even know how to do that?" "I've been working on a plan," Elena said, pulling up a map of the ring. "We'll need to shut down the key mining hubs that destabilize the energy grid, but they were deep within alien-controlled territory. Great, Jonas muttered. We'll need a team to go in and manually shut them down. Elena nodded grimly, and there's no guarantee we'll make it back. Jonas looked at her, his expression hardening with resolve. We have a choice. We either stop this, or we all fall under their control. Elena met his gaze, the weight of their task pressing down on them both. The fate of the colony, and perhaps humanity itself, rested on their shoulders. Lena paced restlessly in the temporary command post set up near the colony's perimeter. The air was thick with tension, and the distant hum of machinery provided an eerie backdrop to the growing sense of dread. Every corner of the colony seemed touched by the alien presence now, and the once bustling settlement felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. Dr. Royce and Captain Mercer had called for a final briefing. Lena knew that whatever they were planning would be dangerous, but after what she'd witnessed in the mining tunnels, she felt a deep responsibility to help stop the madness she'd unwittingly unleashed. All right, Jonas began addressing the small group gathered around a digital map of the ring. His voice was calm, but the lines of fatigue etched into his face betrayed the pressure he was under. We have 3 primary targets: mining hubs, Alpha, Beta, and Delta. These are the sites where the energy grid was compromised. Shutting them down should help reestablish the containment field around the ring. But the path to those hubs is completely controlled by the Ancients. Lena stepped forward, arms crossed. So how exactly are we supposed to reach these hubs without getting turned into their puppet? Alina looked up from her tablet, her expression grave. I've developed a prototype neural dampener, basically a device that interferes with their ability to control our minds. It's sound untested, but it's the best shot we have. Lena raised an eyebrow, untested, and what happens if it fails? We become part of their hive mind, Elena answered bluntly. I could say, risk we have to take. Jonas' gaze swept over the room. This is a volunteer mission. No one here is being forced into it, but understand this is our last chance to save the colony and ourselves. A heavy silence followed his words. Each person in the room understood the gravity of the situation. They had all seen what the Ancients could do, friends and colleagues transformed into mindless drones, bodies twisted by the alien influence. There was no need for further persuasion. Amina said, breaking the silence. I helped trigger this, so I'm gonna help fix it. Me too, added Corporal Stevens, one of Jonas's most trusted soldiers. You're going down, I'd rather go down fighting. One by one, the others nodded their agreement, their faces set with grim determination. The mission was suicide, but it was also their only hope. Jonas exhaled slowly, his voice steady. Try we move out at dawn, get some rest. You were going to need it. The briefing ended, and the group dispersed, preparing for what was likely their final mission. Lionel lingered, glancing at the map one last time before stepping outside into the cold, dim light of the ring's artificial day. The horizon glowed faintly with the ring's energy, casting long shadows over the colony. She wondered if this would be the last time she would see it. The journey to the first hub was treacherous. Lena, Jonas, Elena, and the small team of soldiers moved cautiously through the dense forests that surrounded the colony. Sun outer limit. The once vibrant and alien flora now appeared twisted and decayed, a reflection of the ring's deteriorating ecosystem. Strange whispers floated through the air, tugging at the edges of their minds, but Elena's neural dampeners seemed to be holding for the moment. They traveled in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a physical force. Every step felt like it carried them deeper into the jaws of the enemy. Lena kept her eyes forward, gripping her pulse rifle tightly. Her fingers itched to pull the trigger, but no enemy had yet shown itself. It wasn't until they reached the first hub that the full extent of the alien presence revealed itself. The mining station had been completely overtaken by the Ancient. Pulsating organic growths spread across the facility, sad metal surfaces creeping over walls and machinery like a living infection. The air was thick with a strange humming vibration that made Lena's skin crawl. The ground itself seemed to pulse in time with the ring's energy, as if the planet were breathing. Stay close, Jonas whispered, signaling for the team to spread out and secure the area. We want dates down, and then we move on. Lena followed Elena to the main console where they would need to initiate the shutdown sequence. As they approached, the alien growths twitched, as if sensing their presence. The neural dampeners hummed louder, struggling to block out the increasing pressure on their mind. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the facility, and from the shadows emerged several colonists, no longer themselves, their eyes blank and faces twisted into grotesque masks of rage. They moved with jerky, unnatural movements, their bodies contorted by the alien influence. "Open fire," Jonas barked, raising his rifle. The sound of gunfire ripped through the air as the team unleashed a hail of bullets at the advancing figure. But the colonists, now puppets of the ancients, did not retreat. They charged forward with terrifying speed, their limbs flailing as they closed the distance. Lena fired her rifle, her pulse pounding in her ears. She tried not to think about the fact that these were once people, her people. There was no saving them now. Elena worked furiously at the console, her fingers flying across the controls. "Terrain, we almost there." She shouted over the din of battle. "Make it fast?" Jonas grunted, taking down another controlled colonist. "We running out of time." Lena caught a glimpse of movement to her right, a colonist. A woman she recognized, sprinting toward her with bloodshot eyes and a wild, inhuman scream. She hesitated for only a second before pulling the trigger. The woman crumpled to the ground, and Lena's stomach twisted. There was no room for hesitation out here. "Got it," Elena cried, and with a final keystroke, the facility's lights flickered, then went dark. The alien growth shuddered violently, then began to wither, retreating from the walls like a dying organism. "We've got 2 more to go," Jonas shouted, signaling the team to regroup. They didn't stop to rest. Time was running out. The second hub was even more dangerous than the first. By now, the ancients were fully aware of their efforts to restore the containment field, and their control over the colonists had intensified. The team encountered larger groups of infected colonists and strange alien creatures that seemed to have manifested from the ring SAS energy itself, creatures with long sinuous limbs and glowing eyes that stalked them through the dense forest. Lena moved in a daze, her muscles burning from exhaustion, but her mind sharp with adrenaline. She couldn't stop thinking about the miners, those who'd been the first to be controlled, and the role she had played in triggering this nightmare. But there was no time for self-recrimination. Survival was all that mattered now. By the time they reached the third and final hub, they were down 2 men. The losses weighed heavily on the group, but there was no turning back. The containment field had to be reactivated, or everything they fought for would be lost. The final hub was located deep within a canyon, the entrance guarded by a massive alien structure that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the ring, the core of the ancients' power. Lena's breath hitched as she gazed at the towering structure, its biomechanical walls writhing like a living creature. "This is it," Jonas said, his voice low creep. "Once we shut this down, the containment should reactivate. Should nerves ache, or nerves free." Elena shot her a grim look. "I should have only shot." They moved into the structure cautiously, the air thick with tension. Every corner seemed to watch them, every shadow a potential threat. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, until it felt as if the walls were closing in on them. At the heart of the structure, they found the central control node, a massive glowing orb of energy that pulsed in time with the ring as fluctuation. Alien tendrils writhed around it, feeding off the energy like parasites. "We'll need to overload the core," Elena said, approaching the console. "It should trigger a cascade that will reset the entire system." As she began working on the console, the room trembled and the whispers in their minds grew louder, more insistent. Lena pressed a hand to her temple, fighting against the growing pressure. "They know what we're redoing," Jonas muttered, scanning the room. "Ear, stay sharp." Suddenly, the walls of the structure rippled and the floor beneath them shifted. Alien figures began to emerge from the shadows, twisted forms of both colonists and creatures alike, their eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. Lena raised her rifle, her heart racing. "Hurry, Wi-Fi got company." The final battle erupted in a blur of gunfire and chaos. Lena fought with everything she had, her body moving on instinct as she dodged the attacks of the alien-controlled being. Jonas was a force of nature beside her, his rifle spitting fire as he mowed down the advancing horde. But it was clear that they were outnumbered and the enemy was closing in fast. "Elena, now would be a good time," Jonas shouted, firing off a burst of rounds. "Almost there," Elena called back, her fingers flying over the control. Lena could feel the walls pressing in on them, the whispers clawing at the edges of her mind. Just when she thought they couldn't hold out any longer, Elena shouted triumphantly, "Stanley, got it." The entire structure shuddered, and the glowing orb at its center flared to life, sending out a pulse of energy that rippled through the ring world. The alien figures around them froze, their controls severed as the containment field reactivated. Lena collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as the oppressive presence in her mind faded. Around her, the alien control colonists felt their bodies limp and lifeless. It was over. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and rebuilding. The colony had been ravaged by the conflict, but the reactivation of the containment field had stabilized the ring's ecosystem. The ancients had been sealed away once more, their power contained for now. Lena stood at the edge of the colony, staring up at the ring as it shimmered in the sky above. The cost of their survival weighed heavily on her, and the faces of those they had lost haunted her thought. But they had done it. They had saved the colony, even if the price had been steep. Jonas approached, his expression somber. "We did it," he said quietly. "Yeah," Lena replied, her voice hollow. "We did." Alina joined them, her face lined with exhaustion but filled with quiet determination. "The ancients are sealed away, but this isn't over. We need to ensure that what happened here never happens again." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on the ring. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the colony, Lena knew that their fight was far from over. The ancients had been defeated, but the memory of their control, their whispers would linger in her mind for as long as she lived. But for now, the ring was silent, and humanity had won a fragile, hard-fought victory. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The blackness of space stretched endlessly around the lone Earth colony ship, Orion, a solitary survivor adrift in a sea of stars. Its engines long since silenced, the ship moved in eerie stillness, the hum of its systems barely perceptible. Inside, the surviving crew and passengers clung to the fragile hope that somewhere in this vast unknown, they might find sanctuary. Captain Sarah Kendrick stood on the observation deck, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as she gazed out at the uncharted galaxy ahead. Her eyes, hardened by the recent war, scanned the stars as though she could find answers among them. The last war between Earth and the alien coalition had been swift and brutal, wiping out all that humanity had built now. Orion was all that was left of Earth's colony. "We were alone out here," Commander Raul Winters said, stepping up beside her. His voice was low, his posture rigid, with the same tension Sarah felt deep in her bone. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She had the same thought countless times since their ship had slipped away from the burning remnants of their home. But it wasn't something she could give voice to. Not now, not with the weight of hundreds of lives depending on her. "What status?" she asked. Instead, her tone clipped. "We've entered an uncharted sector," Winters replied, gesturing toward the navigation screen. "No record of this place in any of our databases. We reblind and we reload on resources." Sarah exhaled slowly. "We'll have to take risks. We can stay adrift forever." Dr. Ethan Markov, the ship's lead scientist, approached them with hurried step. His face was drawn tight, eyes gleaming with nervous energy. "Captain, I picked up a signal. It's faint, but definitely artificial. We might not be alone after all." Where Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Markov pointed to the star chart on the screen, indicating a cluster of planets in a distant system. "Sheer on there, it's off a few days' travel, if we push the engine." Sarah studied the data. A signal could mean salvation or danger. They had no way of knowing what awaited them in this unknown star system, but they couldn't afford to ignore the possibility of help. "Set a course," she ordered, and informed the crew. "We are making contact." As Winters moved to relay the orders, Sarah remained at the window, her thoughts drifting to the people under her care. They were the last of humanity, a fragile remnant caught in the crossfire of alien powers far beyond their understanding. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew there was no turning back now. Days passed as Orion cut through the darkness, the stars blurring into streaks of light as the ship's engines pushed them toward their unknown destination. The crew moved through their routines with mechanical precision, aware of the precariousness of their situation. Every glance, every whispered conversation carried an undercurrent of fear. They were drifting into uncharted territory with no way to predict what might await them. Sarah spent those days in quiet reflection, her mind constantly turning over the possibility. What if the signal was a trap? What if they stumbled into a hostile empire, or worse, another enemy bent on their destruction? She knew that they had to prepare for the worst even as they hoped for the best. On the fourth day, the planet came into view. It was a gas giant swirling with vibrant blue and green clouds, its surface glittering with the light of distant stars. Prepare a scouting team. But you'll need eyes on the ground before we make any decision. Commander Winters nodded, already assembling a small team to investigate. They were seasoned professionals, survivors of the war, and they knew what was at stake. Sarah watched them suit up, her gut tight with unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far larger than they could comprehend. The shuttle descended from the Orion, its thrusters flaring against the dark backdrop of space. Sarah monitored the mission from the command deck, her eyes fixed on the feed from the shuttles and camera. As they touched down on the barren surface of the moon, the team disembarked, weapons at the ready. The landscape was desolate, an expanse of rock and dust stretching into the distance. But as they ventured further from the landing site, something caught their attention. Structures rising from the ground, tall and angular, their metallic surfaces glinting in the pale light of the distant sun. Captain Weave found something. Winter's voice crackled over the comm. Sarah leaned forward, her pulse quickening. It said it looks like a settlement abandoned, but not for long. The signal sound coming from here. Before Sarah could respond, Winters continued, his voice tense. There's got company. On the feed, dark shapes appeared at the edge of the screen. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the unmistakable forms of alien ships, sleek, angular vessels hovering above the horizon. Get back to the shuttle, she barked. Anyatuk. Chrono. The team scrambled to retreat, but the alien ships were already closing in. Laser fire streaked through the air, narrowly missing the fleeing human. Winters and his team fired back, but it was clear they were outgunned. Sarah watched helplessly as the shuttle was hit, its engines sputtering and failing. Aboard the mission, she shouted into the comms ear, "Get out of there." But it was too late. The alien ships descended upon the team, surrounding them with an almost predatory gaze. The last image on the screen was Winter's grim face before the feed cut out entirely. Back on the Orion, tension was at a breaking point. The scouting team had been captured, and Sarah knew they couldn't leave them behind. But launching a rescue mission into unknown territory against an alien force they knew nothing about was a dangerous gamble. What do we know about these aliens? Not much. Their technology is advanced, more so than anything we've encountered before. But they haven't attacked us directly. It's possible they want something from us. Sarah clenched her fists, or they were just waiting for the right moment. Before she could make a decision, the ship's communication systems flared to life, an unfamiliar voice crackling through the static. Earth vessel, you are in Zarkath territory. Surrender immediately or face destruction. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Zarkath, one of the most feared and powerful empires in the galaxy. Their reputation for ruthlessness was legendary, and they were known to conquer entire systems without hesitation. She hesitated, weighing her options. Surrendering could mean the end of Orion and humanity, so last hope. But fighting back against a force like the Zarkath was suicide. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the transmission, smoother and more diplomatic. This is Ambassador Rellis of the Illyrian Confederacy, Earth vessel. We offer you protection and safe harbor within our borders. Do not engage with the Zarkath. Two alien powers, each offering vastly different fates. Sarah's mind raced as she considered the implication. The Zarkath would likely strip the ship for its technology and enslave the crew, while the Illyrians, though less militaristic, were fragmented and weak. Neither option guaranteed survival, but one thing was clear: they were caught in the middle of a galactic power struggle. Captain, what do we do? Sarah took a deep breath, her decision weighing heavily on her shoulder. She opened the comms, addressing both alien factions at once. This is Captain Sarah Kendrick of the Earth colony ship Orion. We do not seek conflict. However, we will not submit to any force. We are prepared to negotiate with both the Zarkath and the Illyrians on equal terms. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sarah feared she had overplayed her hand. But then the Zarkath commander responded, his voice laced with disdain. You are in no position to make demands. Captain, we will be boarding your vessel shortly. Sarah's heart sank. But before she could respond, Ambassador Rylis' calm voice interjected once again. Captain Kendrick, we respect your desire for neutrality. We will send a diplomatic envoy to meet with you. The Zarkath have no right to claim your vessel. Do not submit to their threat. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her resolve. She had to play this carefully, or she would doom them all. Sarah kept her voice steady as she responded to Ambassador Rylus. Freya understood. We will await your envoy. She closed the comms and turned to face the crew gathered on the command deck. The tension was palpable, every face drawn tight with fear. The Zarkath were moments away from boarding, and they had no way of knowing if the Illyrians could help or if they were merely prolonging the inevitable. We need to prepare for the worst, Sarah said, her voice firm. The Zarkath won't back down easily. I want all systems on standby engines, weapons, shields. If they make a move, we'll be ready. Markov frowned, glancing at the ship's status. Hi, Captain. Our weapons are barely functional. If it comes to a fight, we won. Test. Long. I know, Sarah said grimly, but we were not going down without a fight. The minutes dragged on as the crew braced for the Zarkath's next move. Sarah could feel the weight of every second pressing down on her, each breath a reminder of how little time they had. Then, without warning, the ship's sensors flared to life, detecting a new incoming vessel. Off the vets. The Illyrians, Thierry Winters reported Treya, they were hailing us. Sarah allowed herself a small breath of relief. The screen blinked to life, revealing the face of Ambassador Rylus. He was a tall, slender figure with pale, almost translucent skin and large, dark eyes that shimmered with intelligence. Behind him stood several other Illyrian officials, their postures formal and unyielding. Captain Kendrick, Rylus said, his tone calm but firm. We have arrived to mediate this situation. The Zarkath have no legitimate claim over your vessel. As members of the Illyrian Confederacy, we offer you our protection. Before Sarah could respond, another transmission cut through. The screen split to show the Zarkath commander, a hulking figure with a harsh, angular face and eyes that burned with cold fury. This is nonsense. The Zarkath commander spat. The vessel is in Zarkath territory. It belongs to us. You have no legal right to claim them. Here Rylus countered, his voice even. This ship and its crew are under our protection now. The tension between the two alien powers was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threat. Sarah stood in the middle of it, aware that the wrong word could send them all spiraling into chaos. Ambassador Rylus, Commander Zordak, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the silence. I understand that both of you are offering assistance, but we will not be pawns in this conflict. We are an independent vessel, and we intend to remain that way. Zordak sneered. You have no choice, Captain. Your ship is crippled, your resources depleted. Surrender now and we may allow your people to live. That's not happening. Rylus's expression didn't change, but there was a hint of approval in his eye. Captain Kendrick, I believe we can find a solution that benefits both of us. The Confederacy does not seek to control your people, only to protect them. Protect them? Zordak scoffed. Stop, or you mean use them for your own purposes. Don't you be fooled, Captain. The Illyrians are weak, fragmented. They'll offer you nothing but false promises. Sarah's mind raced. She knew Zordak wasn't entirely wrong. The Illyrian Confederacy was a loose coalition of races, often divided and slow to act. But the alternative was falling under the thumb of the Zarkath, a fate she couldn't accept. Before she could respond, the lights on the command deck flickered. A loud hum reverberated through the ship, followed by a series of warning alarms. We're being boarded. Winters shouted. Zarkath's forces are breaching the hull. Sarah cursed under her breath. All hands to battle stations. Prepare for defense. The command deck erupted into controlled chaos as the crew scrambled to defend the ship. Sarah gripped the edge of the console, her heart pounding as she issued rapid orders. Seal off the lower decks. Focus on protecting the bridge and the core system. Winters was already coordinating with the security teams, his voice sharp and decisive. We've had reports of Zarkath troops on decks 3 and 4. They were moving fast. Get a team down there and slow them down, Sarah ordered. AL8, we can tell of them reach the bridge. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the ship as the battle began in earnest. Zareth's pulse raced, her mind locked. In survival mode, they had faced overwhelming odds before, but this was different. The Zarkath were relentless, their superior technology a looming shadow over everything. The ship shook violently as another explosion rocked the hull, and Sarah had to steady herself against the console. "Tell us status report," Hal, she barked. "We've upped containment on deck 4. Shwarnalkov calls out. Bowley Zarkath are pushing through. We need reinforcement. Send the second wave." Sarah ordered. Fingdon. Don paid any more ground. She turned back to the comms where both Rylus and Zordak were still visible on the screen. The Ilarian ambassador looked concerned, while the Zarkath commander wore a smug grin. "You've made a grave mistake, Captain," Zordak said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your assistance is futile." Sarah glared at him. "We'll see about that." Just then, a new voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, this is Lena. I am on deck 5 with a group of civilians. We've barricaded ourselves in one of the storage rooms, but we're running out of options." Sarah's chest tightened. Lena, she had almost forgotten the young girl in the chaos. She glanced at Winters, who was already pulling up the deck schematic. "We were pinned down," Lena continued, her voice shaking. "Sarah, I don't know how much longer we can hold them on." Sarah's mind raced. They couldn't afford to lose the civilians, but sending more security teams to deck 5 would leave the bridge vulnerable. It was a lose-lose situation. "Hold your position," Lena, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Sarah, we resending reinforcements?" She turned to Winters. "Get a team down there now. I don't care what it takes. Get those people out of there." Winters nodded and quickly relayed the orders. Sarah returned her attention to the screens where the Zarkath and Ilarian representatives were still watching. "Ambassador Rylus," she said, her voice tight with urgency. If you truly want to help now, say the time. The Zarkath are boarding my ship. We need immediate assistance." Rylus didn't hesitate. "I will dispatch reinforcements to your location. Hold on, Captain." Zordak's expression darkened. "You are making a mistake. Kendrick, the Ilarians won. T save you." "We'll see," Sarah said, cutting the comm. The battle raged on, the ship shuddering under the relentless assault. Sarah could hear the distant sound of gunfire and explosions, each one a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. But she refused to give in to despair. They had come too far, survived too much, to let the Zarkath take them next. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the crew fought to defend the ship. The security teams managed to push the Zarkath back from the lower decks, but the cost was high. Too many lives lost, too much damage. Done, the ship was barely holding together. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life again. "Hi, Captain. This is Winters. Well, I've got Lena and the civilians out. They were safe for now." Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was short-lived. "Our good work, Commander. Get them to the bridge. We need all hands here." As Winters and his team escorted the civilians to safety, Sarah turned her attention back to the tactical display. The Zarkath were regrouping, preparing for another wave, and this time, it looked like they were bringing something bigger. "Captain, we've got a problem," Plotmarkov said, his voice grim. "The Zarkath have deployed heavy artillery. If they fire on us, we're done for time." Sarah's heart sank. They had fought so hard, but it seemed like the end was inevitable. She could see the tension in her crew, the fear in their eyes as they realized how dire the situation was. But then, out of nowhere, the ship sensors detected a massive energy signature. Sarah glanced at the display, her eyes widening in disbelief. "It's at the Ilarians," Markov said, his voice filled with awe. "They've sent reinforcements, and they're re-engaging the Zarkath." Sarah stared at the screen as the Ilarian ship swooped in, firing on the Zarkath forces with pinpoint precision. The Zarkath, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, but the Ilarians were relentless. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. The Zarkath ships retreated, their forces pulling back as the Ilarians pressed the attack. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the enemy that had seemed so unstoppable moments ago was forced to retreat. When it was over, the Ilarians hailed the Iran once more. Ambassador Rylus appeared on the screen, his expression calm but resolute. "You fought well, Captain," he said, "but this battle is far from over. The Zarkath will return, and when they do, they will be stronger. You need allies." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of the situation sinking in. "I know." Rylus' gaze softened. A confederacy can offer you that alliance. Not as conquerors, but as partners. Together, we can ensure that your people survive. Sarah glanced around at her crew, at Winters, at Markov, at the exhausted faces of those who had fought so hard to defend their home. They were battered, bruised, and barely holding on, but they were still here, still fighting. We'll need time to consider your offer, Halate, Sarah said carefully. Stop, know this. We want to be anyone's sign. Ryla smiled faintly. As the commons went dark, Sarah turned to her crew, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The Zarkas would return. The battle for their survival had only just begun. But for now, they'd won a small victory, and that was enough. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Elysium, the planet's surface, below a green and gold patchwork of lush forests, sprawling meadows, and flowing rivers that glittered under a bright, unrelenting sun. Captain Mira Torres stood at the helm, peering out through the reinforced window as the planet's untamed beauty spread beneath them. This was humanity, some newest agricultural colony, the chosen world where crops would thrive and the future of food production would be secure. They were the first team pioneers, explorers, cultivators of this new Eden. Her hand tightened on the armrest, a faint tremor of anticipation curling in her gut. She had led colonization missions before, but nothing like this. The planet's ecosystem was rich, the air breathable without modification, and the land teeming with plant life that seemed more vibrant than any they'd seen in other colonization attempts. Dr. Noah Carlisle, the team's botanist, was practically bouncing on his feet beside her, his face lit with boyish excitement as he watched their approach. Captain, this is incredible. He breathed, eyes wide. I've never seen anything like it. The reports didn't even do it justice. Torres allowed herself a small smile. It's something, isn't I? The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the mechanical hum of the landing gear fading into the chorus of alien sounds that immediately filled the air. Strange bird calls, the distant rush of wind through towering alien trees. The team, a mix of scientists, engineers, and agriculturalists, unbuckled their harnesses and prepared to disembark. Lieutenant Connor, head of security, was already on his feet, scanning the data readouts on his handheld tablet. The perimeter looks clear, Captain. He said no signs of hostile life forms. It's safe to proceed. All right, people, Torres said, her voice carrying authority. This is it. We were the first humans to set foot on Elysium, and our job is to make sure we read out the last. Let's get to work. They exited the shuttle, stepping onto soft moss-covered ground that gave slightly beneath their boot. The air was warm and thick with the scent of strange alien flowers, their petals blooming in iridescent shades of blue, purple, and gold. Trees stretched toward the sky, their trunks twisted and coiled like giant ropes, leaves shimmering like gemstones in the dappled sunlight. Carlisle crouched beside a cluster of ferns, his fingers brushing against the delicate frond. Incredible, he whispered. The growth here is accelerated. It's cell-like. The plants have been supercharged. Torres nodded, her gaze sweeping the landscape. Let's not waste any time. Connor, get the perimeter set up. Henderson, start testing the soil for earth crop. We need to know how well this planet will support our agriculture. The team spread out, each member falling into their assigned tasks with the efficiency of well-trained professionals. Temporary habitats were erected, sensors placed at key points around the perimeter, and drones sent out to map the surrounding area. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect, better than perfect. The soil was rich, far exceeding expectations, and the native plants, though unfamiliar, appeared benign. But as the days passed, subtle signs began to emerge. Connor was the first to notice. He approached Torres one evening as she stood by the perimeter fence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Captain, he said, his voice low, there, something I've been keeping an eye on. Torres turned to him, raising an eyebrow. What is it? The plants, he said, gesturing toward the trees and vines that bordered their camp. They're removing. Torres frowned, moving. I know how it sounds, Connor said quickly, but I've been watching. Each night, the perimeter shifts. The vines, the trees, they were creeping closer. She stared at him, her brow furrowing. That said impossible. Plants don't jet. I'm telling you, Captain Connor insisted. I've seen it. They were getting closer slowly, but it's happening. Taurus glanced toward the trees, their twisted trunks and shimmering leaves, casting long shadows in the fading light. "I will have Carlosa look into it," she said, though her voice carried a note of skepticism. Connor nodded, but his expression remained tense. "Just keep an eye on it." The next day, Torres called a meeting with Dr. Carlisle. The botanist had been collecting samples and running tests on the native flora, fascinated by the rapid growth rates and unusual chemical compositions of the plant. Carlisle, Torres said, leaning forward in her chair. "Connor thinks the plants are moving. What do you make of that?" Carlisle chuckled, shaking his head. "Moving like walking trees, that's a bit far-fetched, even for an alien planet." "I don't know," Torres replied. He seems pretty convinced. "Is there any way the plants here could have some kind of mobility?" Carlos considered the question for a moment before answering. "I suppose it's possible. The plants here are certainly different from anything we've seen before. They react to stimuli, almost like they have a nervous system. But actual movement, I'd need more data." Torres sighed. "Get the data, then I want to know what we were dealing with." For the next few days, Carlisle and his team set up cameras and sensors around the perimeter, hoping to catch any signs of unusual plant behavior. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but on the fourth night they found their answer. The footage was subtle but unmistakable. In the dead of night, the vines lining the perimeter began to stir, inching forward like snakes through the grass. By morning, they had retracted, leaving no visible trace of their movement. Carlisle stared at the footage in stunned silence. "My God," he muttered. Connor was right. Torres crossed her arms, her expression grim. "What are we dealing with here? Carlisle, is it a threat?" I don't know, Carlisle admitted, "but this changes everything. These plants aren't just passive organisms. They were active, reactive, maybe even intelligent." The news sent a ripple of unease through the camp for the first time. The colonists began to feel like intruders, trespassers in a world that wasn't out there. And as the plants continued to creep closer, the sense of foreboding deepened. Then the first attack happened. Private Jenkins was on patrol, walking the perimeter with his rifle slung over his shoulder. The night was quiet, the air thick with the scent of alien flowers. He passed by a cluster of vines, their tendrils curled innocuously against the ground. But as he moved, one of the vines shot out, wrapping around his ankle with lightning speed. Jenkins barely had time to scream before the vine yanked him off his feet, dragging him into the dense underbrush. His comms crackled with static as he called for help, but by the time Torres and Connor arrived, he was gone. They found his body the next morning, tangled in a mass of vines that had pierced his skin, their thorny tendrils coiling around his limbs like the fingers of a monstrous hand. Carlisle examined the body, his face pale as he worked. "The plants," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were feeding on him." Torres' stomach turned. "Feeding?" Carlisle nodded grimly. "These vines, they were parasitic. They latch onto their prey and drain them of nutrients. Jenkins, he was consumed." The camp fell into chaos. After Jenkins' death, fear spread like wildfire, the colonists looking over their shoulders at every rustling leaf, every swaying vine. Torres tried to keep order, but it was clear they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. "We need to leave," Connor said one night as they huddled in the command tent, going over their options. "We were not equipped to handle this. These plants, they were predators, and we were the prey. We can too just abandon the mission," Torres argued. "We've barely begun." "We've already lost Jenkins," Connor shot back. "How many more will it take before we realize we were not welcome here?" Torres ran a hand through her hair, frustration galling at her. "We don't know that for sure. Maybe there's a way to coexist." "Carlisle, what do you think?" Carlisle, who had been staring at his data tablet in silence, looked up with haunted eye. I think this planet is alive. The plants, the trees, they were all connected, a single organism acting as one." "A hive mind?" Torres asked, incredulous. "Something like that." Carlisle said it. "It sounds like the entire ecosystem is working together to protect itself. We were not just invaders, we were a threat, and the planet is fighting back." Torres felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a hostile environment. It was a war zone, and they were vastly outnumbered. As the days passed, the attacks became more frequent. Vines slithered into the camp at night, wrapping around equipment, disabling their tech. Strange, carnivorous plants began appearing near the perimeter, their petals snapping shut like jaws around anything that came too close. Several more colonists disappeared, their bodies never found. It became clear that they couldn't hold out much longer. The tension in the camp thickened with each passing hour, Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of the trees sent the colonists into high alert. Captain Mira, Torres paced inside the command tent, running through scenarios, weighing their limited options. Lieutenant Connors stood by the door, his face hard and unreadable, while Dr. Carlisle hunched over his tablet, scanning the data on the strange biology of the plants that had so far outsmarted all their defenses. "We have to make a decision, Captain," Connor said quietly, his voice strained. "We're losing people faster than we can handle. If we don't get out of here, no one's going to make it." Torres didn't look up. She knew he was right, but abandoning the mission meant acknowledging their defeat, a defeat they couldn't afford. This colony was supposed to be humanity, says Future, a new frontier that would sustain life for generations. And now it felt like the planet was rejecting them at every turn. "There's something we were missing," she murmured more to herself than to anyone else. "Something about these plants. Why do they see us as a threat?" "They don't just see us as a threat," Carlisle said, his voice hollow. "They reacting to us as if we were an infection. They retargeting us because we were disturbing their equilibrium. The more we fight back, the harder they hit." Connor stepped forward, his face tight with frustration. "Look, we're out of time for theory. We need to find a way to get that emergency beacon working again. If we don't, send a distress signal soon. The only thing left to bury will be our bone." Torres closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to think. The perimeter fence was useless. Now overrun by the plants, their communications equipment had been swallowed by creeping vines that seemed to hunger for anything technological. And their weapons, though effective at first, had only incited the plants to become more aggressive, more calculated in their attack. And an idea formed in her mind, something that had been niggling at her since Jenkins' death. "What if we were the ones making them hostile?" she asked, finally turning to face them. "Every time we try to destroy or cut back the plants, they come at us harder. What if there's another way to communicate with them, something that doesn't involve aggression?" Connor's brow furrowed in confusion. "Communicate. These things aren't animals. They were plants that are acting with a level of intelligence," Carlisle added, rubbing his chin. "We haven't been treating this planet like any other, assuming we can carve out our own space. But what if that's not how it works here? What if the entire planet is connected, one massive organism that we're disrupting?" Torres looked at the two of them. "Exactly. We've been treating this like a colonization effort, but maybe it's more like diplomacy. If we can figure out what these plants want, maybe we can find a way to coexist." Connor shook his head, the soldier in him rejecting the idea outright. "We don't have time for peace talks, Captain. We need to focus on survival." "We've tried fighting, and it's only made things worse," Torres shot back. "If we keep doing the same thing, we were going to lose everyone. We have to try something different." Carlisle hesitated before nodding slowly. "There might be a way. If the plants communicate chemically, like a hive mind, we could try sending out signals that mimic theirs. It's risky. But if we can tap into their network, we might be able to find out how to make them stop." Connor folded his arms, and if it doesn't work, Torres stared out of the tent at the dense forest that surrounded them, the alien foliage swaying in a breeze that didn't feel natural. "If it doesn't work, we fall back on plan B, we blow the emergency generators and hope the EMP is enough to knock them offline, give us a window to escape." Silence fell between them as they weighed the gravity of the plan. There was no guarantee either approach would work, but doing nothing was a death sentence. "Let's get back to work," Torres said finally. Carlisle spent the next several hours in the makeshift lab synthesizing a compound that he hoped would mimic the planet's natural chemical signal. The idea was to release the compound into the atmosphere, creating a kind of peace offering that would signal to the plants that the humans were no longer a threat. As the time ticked by, the tension in the camp became unbearable. The colonists knew they were running out of time. Another attack could come at any moment, and they were barely holding the perimeter as it was. Vines slithered closer, creeping under tents and wrapping around their equipment, as though testing the boundaries of human resistance. Finally, Carlisle emerged, holding a small canister. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly, but there was a determined gleam in his eyes. "This is it," he said. "If this doesn't work." Torres nodded. "Let's give it a shot." They gathered in the center of the camp, the remaining colonists forming a tight circle around Carlisle as he prepared to release the compound. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, the sounds of rustling leaves and creeping vines growing louder, more insistent. It felt as though the planet itself was watching. waiting. Carlisle took a deep breath and activated the canister. A fine mist sprayed into the air, dispersing quickly and mingling with the humid atmosphere. For a moment, nothing happened. The team stood frozen, every muscle tense as they waited for a response. Then the forest around them seemed to shudder. The trees swayed violently, their branches twisting in unnatural pattern. The vines that had been inching toward the camp suddenly stopped, recoiling as though repelled by some unseen force. The ground beneath their feet rumbled softly, as if the planet was considering the offering. Carlisle held his breath. Come on, come on. The plants remained still, their movements slowing until they were almost imperceptible. The forest fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant chirping of alien birds. The colonists exchanged glances, their fear giving way to cautious hope. It's working, Carlisle whispered, a note of disbelief in his voice. They responded. But the relief was short-lived. Just as Carlisle lowered the canister, a deafening crack echoed through the tree. The ground trembled violently, and without warning, massive roots burst from the earth, snaking toward the camp with terrifying speed. The plants had accepted their offering, but not in the way they had hoped. They rushed attacking, Connor shouted, grabbing his rifle. The camp erupted into chaos as the colonists scrambled to defend themselves. Vines whipped through the air, lashing out at anything in their path. Tent poles, snapped equipment was torn apart, and the colonists' screams mingled with the roar of the planet's fury. Torres grabbed Carlisle by the arm and dragged him toward the command tent. The MP, we need to activate it now. Connor and a few remaining security officers fired desperately at the advancing vines, but it was a losing battle. The plants were relentless, moving with purpose and precision. They were no longer just defending themselves, they were eradicating the threat. Torres and Carlisle burst into the command tent, the floor shaking beneath their feet as the planet continued its assault. Torres slammed her fist down on the control panel, activating the emergency generator. The hum of the equipment filled the air, followed by a high-pitched whine as the imp reached to full power. Come on, come on, Torres muttered under her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside, the vines had breached the inner perimeter, wrapping around the command tent's supports and pulling with incredible force. The fabric walls strained, the metal groaning under the pressure. With a final piercing whine, the impact discharged. A blinding flash of light erupted from the generators, followed by a shockwave that rippled through the camp. The vines recoiled instantly, their tendrils twitching violently as the pulse disrupted their neural network. The ground shook one last time before falling deathly still. For a moment, there was only silence. Torres stood in the doorway of the command tent, watching as the vines slowly retreated into the forest, their movements sluggish and disoriented. The imp had worked, at least temporarily. The plants were withdrawing, but the damage had been done. Only a handful of colonists remained, their numbers decimated by the relentless attack. The camp lay in ruins, torn apart by the planet. Srath equipment was scattered, tents were shredded, and the bodies of their fallen comrades lay entangled in the alien vines that had claimed them. Torres took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Get to the shuttle. She ordered, her voice hoarse, relieving. The survivors moved quickly, gathering what little they could salvage before making their way to the shuttle. The plants, though, subdued, still watched them from the edges of the clearing, their presence a constant reminder that this world did not belong to humans. As the shuttle lifted off, Torres stared down at the planet, surface her mind racing. They had come here to cultivate a new life, but instead, they had found something far more dangerous, something that could not be tamed or conquered. In the end, Elysium had shown them what it truly was, a world where humans did not belong. The shuttle rose higher, breaking through the atmosphere and into the cold, dark expanse of space. Torres sat back in her seat, her body heavy with exhaustion. They had survived, but the cost had been immense. Carlisle sat beside her, his face pale and haunted. Do you think we'll ever come back? He asked quietly. Torres didn't answer. She wasn't sure. As the shuttle sped away from the planet, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of Elysium's secret, and that whatever lurked beneath the surface of that lush alien world was far more powerful than they could ever imagine. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The horizon's edge drifted silently through the vast expanse of space, its sleek hull reflecting the distant glow of 1 billion stars. Captain Adrienne Cole sat in the command seat, her eyes scanning the holographic display before her, showing nothing but the familiar empty void. A deep sense of unease settled over her, a sensation she had learned to trust during her years of exploring the outer reaches of the galaxy. "Still picking up those energy readings?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Affirmative," Captain replied. "AI Unit 5, the ship Cyrus Artificial Intelligence. Its voice neutral and devoid of emotion. The anomaly remains consistent. We are approaching the source." Adrienne leaned forward, narrowing her gaze, "And we still have no idea what we were heading into." "Negative, Captain. The energy readings are unlike anything recorded in our databases. I recommend caution." Adrienne smirked. "That sounds your recommendation every time we come across something new." Behind her, Dr. Mason Tully, the expedition's xenobiologist, couldn't contain his excitement. "New is what we were here for, Captain. If these readings are what I think they are, we could be on the brink of a major discovery." Adrienne did share his enthusiasm, but she respected his passion. Tully had a way of seeing the wonders of the universe where others saw only danger. It was a trait that had nearly gotten them killed on more than one occasion, but it also made him invaluable. She glanced at Lieutenant Maria Reyes, her second in command, who stood silently at her station, arms crossed, a permanent frown etched on her face. "Thoughts?" Adrienne asked her. "I don't like it. Feels too quiet out here, but if Tully's saying right, we might as well take a closer look. Just be ready for anything." Adrienne nodded and tapped the control panel. "All right, Dex, bring us in closer. Nice and easy." In the engine room, Dex Winters responded with a quick "You got it, Captain," and the ship sense engines hummed as they adjusted course, gliding toward the source of the anomaly. The closer they got, the more intense the energy readings became. The holographic display in front of Adrienne flickered momentarily, distorting as if the ship itself was struggling to comprehend what lay ahead. Then as they crossed the final threshold, space itself seemed to ripple. "There," Tully whispered, staring in awe at the view beyond the cockpit. It was as if they had stumbled upon a tear in the very fabric of the universe. A rift in space-time shimmering with ethereal light hung before them like a portal to another dimension. Beyond it, they could see a galaxy, but not like any they had ever seen before. "This miniature," Tully breathed. "A microgalaxy." Adrienne, as jaw tightened. "Unit 5, analysis. Scans confirm a microgalaxy within the rift, Captain. Numerous planetary bodies detected, each with unique atmospheres and ecosystem. However, the rift is highly unstable. I advise extreme caution." Tully was already pressing forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "We have to go in. Just think of what we could learn from this place." Adrienne hesitated, but the pull of discovery was strong. If they turned back now, they might never find anything like this again. "All right," she said, "but we don't stay long. Get what we need. Then we re-outrise, prepare the team." As Realize moved to gather the crew, Adrienne felt a flicker of doubt. The rift shimmered with an unnatural beauty, but it also felt like a trap. She pushed the thought aside. They had come too far to back down now. The horizon stead. Edge breached the edge of the rift, slipping into the microgalaxy with an almost imperceptible shift in gravity. Inside, the view was nothing short of breathtaking. Small planets orbited in intricate patterns, some glowing with vibrant hues, others shrouded in darkness. Each one seemed to pulse with its own unique energy, like living organisms suspended in space. Adrienne brought the ship closer to the nearest planet, a lush green world teeming with life. "Looks like a jungle down there," she said, studying the scan. Tully's excitement was palpable. "Perfect. I want to take a sample team down, collect data. This is exactly what we've been searching for." Adrienne glanced at Rise, who shook her head. "It's so risky. We don't know how stable this place is." "We won't, until we try," Tully argued. "Captain, this could be the discovery of a lifetime. We were talking about ecosystems that have never been touched by human hand." Adrienne sighed. "All right, but we do this by the book. No unnecessary risks." "Eyes you. With Tully. Dex, you'll pilot the shuttle." "Understood," Ray said, already checking her gear. "I've got a bad feeling about this place, but let's get it done." Minutes later, the shuttle detached from the horizon, sedge, and descended toward the jungle planet. As they broke through the atmosphere, the dense canopy of the alien jungle spread out below them, a sea of green interrupted by the occasional flash of movement, creatures unseen but present. Dex guided the shuttle toward a clearing, his hands steady on the controls. Touchdown in 3, 2, 1. We read out. The team disembarked, stepping into the thick, humid air of the alien jungle. The ground beneath their boots was soft, almost spongy, and the sounds of alien wildlife filled the air. Chirps, growls, and strange, clicking noises that set everyone on edge.
Stay close, Adrian ordered. We don't know what's out here.
Tully, however, was already scanning the surrounding flora with wide-eyed fascination. "Look at this," he exclaimed, crouching beside a large blue plant with spiny tendrils. The bioluminescence, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Rioi stood nearby, her weapon drawn, scanning the tree line. "Let us keep moving. The sooner we get the data we need, the sooner we can get off this rock." They moved deeper into the jungle, collecting samples and cataloging data. Everywhere they looked, there were new discoveries: strange, glowing insects flitting through the air, massive trees with bark that shimmered like metal, and small quadrupedal creatures that darted through the underbrush, watching them with curious, glowing eyes. Tully was in his element, filling his datapad with notes and samples, but Riai's remained tense, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. "Captain," she said quietly, "I don't tough like this. The whole place feels off." Adrienne nodded, sharing her unease. The jungle was beautiful, yes, but it was also unnerving in its stillness, as if the entire planet was watching them. "We'll finish up and head back. I don't want to stay here any longer than we have to." Just as she spoke, the ground beneath them trembled. It was subtle at first, but then a deep rumbling sound echoed through the jungle. "What the hell was that?" Dix asked, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Adrienne glanced at the scanner on her wrist, the rift set becoming more unstable. "We need to move." Tully, however, seemed oblivious to the danger, still engrossed in his work. "Just give me a few more minutes. There's so much more we need to..." A deafening roar cut him off from the dense foliage ahead. A massive creature emerged, an alien predator unlike anything they had seen before. It stood on 4 muscular legs, its body covered in iridescent scales, and its glowing yellow eyes locked onto them with predatory intent. "Move," Reyes shouted, raising her weapon. The team scattered as the creature charged, its jaws snapping with bone-crushing force. Adrena fired her blaster, but the creature's scales deflected the shots. "Tex, get us out of here." Tex didn't he need to be told twice. He sprinted back toward the shuttle, but the creature was fast, too fast. It lunged at Tully, who stumbled and fell, his samples scattering across the jungle floor. Rites moved with lightning reflexes, firing a concentrated burst at the creature, It howled in pain, momentarily stunned, giving her just enough time to pull Tully to his feet. "Go." They ran toward the shuttle, the ground shaking as the creature pursued them. Dex had already started the engines, the shuttle's thrusters humming to life. Come on. Adrienne was the last to board, slamming the hatch shut just as the creature rammed into the side of the shuttle, rocking it violently. "Get us out of here," Dex, she shouted. With a roar of the engines, the shuttle lifted off, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping jaw. As they ascended into the sky, the predator let out one final enraged howl before disappearing into the jungle below. The shuttle broke through the thick cloud cover, leaving the jungle planet behind. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the only sound the steady hum of the engines and the labored breathing of the crew. Adrienne Cole leaned back in her seat, eyes closed for a moment, forcing herself to calm down. Her heart still raced from the narrow escape, but she couldn't let the fear show. Not now. Tully was still shaking beside her, clutching the scattered remnants of his precious sample. His face was pale, beads of sweat clinging to his forehead, but his mind was far from regret. "We need to go back, Captain. There's so much we left behind. Think of the knowledge we could gain." Adrian glared at him. "We almost lost you back there, Tully. This mission isn't worth our life." "It could be worth millions," she shot back, defiance and desperation lacing his voice. "We could be talking about medical breakthroughs, new energy sources." "Enough," Adrienne cut him off. "How we're getting out of this rift. I don't take care of what discoveries are down there. We can risk losing the entire crew." Dex glanced back from the pilot's seat, his usually cocky demeanor subdued. "I hate to say it, Doc, but the captain says, right, that thing nearly turned you into lunch. And I'd rather not find out if there's anything worse out here." Reese, still gripping her weapon, nodded. "We've seen enough. Let's us get back to the ship. Tully opened his mouth to argue, but saw the steely resolve in Adrian's eye. He slumped back in his seat, muttering, "You be throwing away a chance at history." Adrian ignored him. "Dex plot a course back to the horizon," said Edge. "We're done here." But just as the words left her mouth, AI Unit 5's voice chimed in over the shuttle, so calm and emotionless as always. "Captain, new information detected. The instability of the rift is increasing exponentially." Adria's stomach dropped. "Define exponentially." "The rift is collapsing. Captain, I calculate that we have approximately 2 hours before the gravitational anomalies become too severe for safe passage." 2 hours. Dex's eyes widened as he gripped the controls. That's not nearly enough time. Adrian's mind raced. They had barely begun to explore the planets, and now the entire microgalaxy was on the verge of implosion. "We need to get out of here. Now full speed back to the ship." The shuttle accelerated, racing toward the coordinates of the horizon, said, as the jungle planet shrank behind them. Adrian's hands tightened on the armrest. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time faster than even Unit 5 predicted. They cleared the atmosphere, the vastness of space stretching out before them. But something was wrong. Instead of the steady, reassuring hum of the engines, there was a sharp, high-pitched whine. The shuttle shuddered violently. "What is happening?" Adrian demanded, bracing herself as the turbulence increased. Dex's fingers flew over the controls, panic creeping into his voice. "The rift's gravitational field date's pulling us off course. We were getting dragged in deeper." "Can you compensate?" Reese asked, her voice steady despite the tension. "I'm trying," Dex snapped, "but the systems are going haywire. We might have to shut down and reboot." "No time for that," Adrian growled. "We can be stuck out here when this whole place collapses." Just then, the shuttle lurched sideways, as if caught in a massive current. Stars streaked by the windows, their light bending and warping in unnatural patterns. Adrian's stomach churned as space itself seemed to twist around them. "Brace yourselves," Dex shouted. "This is going to be rough." The shuttle hurtled through the rift, spinning wildly out of control. Adrian's vision blurred as she fought to stay conscious, the force of the acceleration pinning her to her seat. Reyes gritted her teeth, holding onto the safety straps with white-knuckled hands. And just as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence stopped. The shuttle stabilized, the stars outside returning to their familiar positions for a brief, blissful moment. There was silence. "Did we make it?" Tully asked, his voice trembling. Dex's hands still hovered over the controls, but the panic was gone from his expression. "I think, yeah, we were clear of the worst of it." Adrian exhaled a long breath, her pulse gradually slowing. "Get us back to the ship now." The rest of the journey passed in tense quiet, the crew too shaken by the close call to speak. When the horizon's edge finally came into view, a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. They docked with the ship, and moments later, the shuttle's side hatch opened, allowing them to disembark. Adrian wasted no time. Unit 5 status report. "Gravitational anomalies are spreading across the rift at an accelerated rate," the AI responded. "The rift will fully collapse within 1 hour and 45 minutes. Adrian glanced at Reyes, then at Dex. "We were leaving. Start prepping the engines for immediate departure." Dex nodded and rushed toward the engine room. Reyes stayed by Adrian's side, her sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit corridors of the ship. "I don't like this, Captain. Something feels off." "You were not wrong," Adrian said quietly. "We never should have come this far." As the crew hurried to their stations, Tully approached Adrian, his face flushed with frustration. "Captain, we can't just leave all of that behind. Think about what we've seen, those ecosystems, those creatures. We could change the course of human science." Adrian rounded on him, her voice ice cold. "What good is changing the course of science if we were dead, Tully? This whole place is coming down around us, and we barely made it out alive. Do you want to risk another trip into that?" Tully opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. He stepped back, muttering, "You don't understand, this is bigger than us." Adrian turned her back on him, her mind focused on one thing, getting her crew home alive. She headed toward the bridge, Reyes following closely behind. As they stepped into the command center, the holographic display showed the rift, now a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to grow more chaotic by the minute. "Dex, how are those engines coming?" Adrian asked, her voice clipped with urgency. "Almost there, Cap." Dex' voice crackled over the comms. "Just a few more minutes." But those few minutes were quickly running out. The rift outside was growing more violent. waves of energy surging toward the ship, distorting the space around it. The horizon set. Edge began to shake, the hull creaking under the strain. Adrienne gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. "We don't have much time." "I am aware," Dex grumbled, his voice strained as he worked feverishly to stabilize the engines. "Just keep the ship together for a few more seconds." The tremors intensified, and Adrienne could feel the ship being pulled toward the rift unit. 5. "What size are status?" "Rift instability at critical levels," the AI responded calmly. "I advise immediate departure." Dex Adrienne barked. "I am on it," came the reply. A moment later, the ship's engines roared to life, and the horizon's sun edge began to pull away from the collapsing rift. The shaking subsided as they gained distance, the vortex of energy shrinking behind them. "Weary clear," Dex finally reported, relief evident in his voice. Adrienne slumped back in her seat, exhaustion washing over her. They had made it barely. She glanced at Rise, who gave a curt nod, her expression as hard as ever. But just as Adrienne began to relax, Unit 5 spoke again, its voice devoid of urgency, yet chilling all the same. "Captain, I have detected a new anomaly. Sentient life forms by form. It appears we were not the only ones to emerge from the rift." Adrienne's stomach twisted with dread. She turned toward the view screen just in time to see something flicker into view, an enormous ship, dark and silent, hovering in the distance. "Brace yourselves," she whispered. "Guys, this isn't over."